altercation with a tight end who plays for Baylor, Michael Trigg, about the color of shirt he was wearing prior to the Arizona State game. But the reports are this has nothing to do with that. Now, what does that have to do with Mark Harlan? Well, Ross Dellinger, who's a plugged-in college football media member, is reporting that Mark could be a potential candidate to step in for Mack Rhoades as the College Football Playoff Committee chair. No official news on that just yet, but we'll get to some of that on the show today. And if anything comes down, of course, while we're on air, we will bring it to you. The Utah Jazz welcoming an old friend tonight. Quinn Snyder's back in Salt Lake City as the head coach of the Atlanta Hawks out of the Eastern Conference. So Jazz back in action. The Utah Mammoth were able to get a win, and J.J. Peterka put one in the back of the net against his old team. We'll do a little hockey on the show, a little NBA on the show as well, as NBA basketball, of course, is back in full force. Oklahoma City continues to play well. Victor Wembanyama continues to put the entire NBA on notice, quite frankly. Nikola Jokic with a double nickel last night in extremely efficient fashion. It looked very easy for Nikola Jokic. So Hawks Jazz at about 7 o'clock tonight at the Delta Center here in downtown Salt Lake City, Utah. So a lot to do, busy show. Hope you guys are doing well. We're going to start things off with Bill Busch, a national championship winning college football coach once upon a time. Coached here in Salt Lake City with the Utah Utes, has a lot of local ties. We'll break down the weekend behind. We will look at the weekend ahead and talk a little college football playoff with Bill Busch. More college football today with Kyle Bonagura, one of our favorites from ESPN, who joins us on a weekly basis. NBA Daily Assist style, we're creeping back into a consistent stop here on the show for some pro basketball with Howard Beck. We'll preview Thursday Night Football, I guess, and talk some NFL with Sam Bruckhouse. And then we will welcome our friends from Handy and Handy for a little sports court, as we are often wont to do on a Thursday afternoon. Bill Busch, Kyle Bonagura, Howard Beck, Sam Bruckhouse, our friends from Handy and Handy. Me, Spence Checketts, all of you, the great listeners, and truck guy who is pro backing trucks up into parking spots, Porter Larson. How are you, young man?
What up? What up? Hot take for you. A couple of them.
Right out of the gates?
Yep, you asked for it.
Wow, I like
Actually,
it.
I don't think you did ask for it today.
No, I want it. I want all of them.
I'm not sure. And listen, I know Mark Harlan has served on the playoff committee before. He has to recuse himself as well of Utah-specific related things. I don't know if I dig the optics. Where sports are in general. This is not a conversation on Utah or Mark or the Big 12 or anything. Just with the news we've had in the last couple of months with a team that's currently in the playoff hunt. Even having someone on the committee in general, yet alone named one this late into the process. But that being said, it's official, actually. So that's part of it. I think having a seat at the table for the Big 12 is a good thing, though. Not really a hot take. I just it caught me as a kind of an interesting story today.
I'm sorry. Did you say it is official?
Yeah.
Oh, here it is. Ross Dellinger, 31 minutes ago. The College Football Playoff Commissioners have formally approved the addition of Utah AD Mark Harlan to the selection committee and Arkansas AD Hunter Yurachek, or however you pronounce his last name, shout out to that guy, as the group's new chair. So there you go. So what you're saying is, are you accusing Mark of collusion here? Like if Utah gets into the CFP, are you saying it's only because their AD is on the committee now?
No, but you do know the conversations that will ensue.
Of course.
If that does happen. And I also don't know that in people at a national perspective and people at a national college football level understand how those conversations go in this state. Gets a little crazy.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. So it was floated as a possibility, and now it is official. Utah Athletic Director Mark Harlan, the selection committee, and the Arkansas AD. So the group's new chair. So it's going to be two of them, I guess. It's not just Mark after Mack Rhoades has decided either on his own accord or ultimately encouraged to take a personal leave. So some weird things going on at Baylor, and if you follow the history of that program, that's really nothing new. Bill Busch will stop by today. We'll dig into all of this news and talk some college football on the program. Bill's our first guest, but before Bill joins us on this Thursday afternoon, courtesy of our good friends and your good friends too at Prize Picks, it's time now for your opening tip.
Welcome to The Drive with Spence Checketts on Utah's #1 sports talk. Now into the studios of ESPN 700 to set the scene for the show. The opening tip of The Drive is brought to you by Prize Picks. Use the code ESPN 700 and run your game with Prize Picks.
You guys already know Prize Picks is the best place to win cash on football. Whether you are a Broncos fan, a Cowboys fan, a Raiders fan, a Jets fan. But pro basketball is back. Prize Picks the best place to win cash on the Jazz, like I did on Kyle Filipowski the other night. Prize Picks offers stacks, okay? So what does stacks mean? Well, you can pick more on the same player up to 3 times in the same lineup. If you want to pick more on Steph Curry's 3-pointers, his assists, and his points overall, you can pick all of them in the same lineup only on Prize Picks. You can follow other Prize Picks players directly on the app, copy their lineups in one click, whether it's a friend, a celebrity partner, or just someone whose picks you like. You can hit the follow button and check out every lineup they create in the new feed tabs on Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code ESPN700 to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Promo code ESPN700 to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup, because on Prize Picks, you already know that it's good to be right. All right, as we were just discussing, Baylor athletic director and the chair of the College Football Playoff Committee, Mack Rhoades, has taken a leave of absence from both jobs. Now, some new information has come down, according to Ross Dellinger, friend of the show. Here's what Ross tweeted out not too long ago. New allegations surfacing this week regarding Baylor AD Mack Rhoades are related to a violation of the faith-based university's policies and practices. Sources tell Yahoo Sports. Baylor is declining comment on this. It involves, quote, a personal matter and a, quote, ongoing investigation. Ross also tweeted out about 2 hours ago that Mark Harlan was in the mix to replace Mack Rhoades. Here was the tweet that Ross sent out. Quote, the Big 12 is recommending Utah AD Mark Harlan to replace Mack Rhoades on the CFP selection committee, sources tell Yahoo Sports. It's still unclear who will fill the committee chair role vacated by Rhoades. Mark Harlan had an abbreviated tenure on the committee of 1 year in 2023, Utah's last year in the Pac-12, before moving to the Big 12. Now, we fast forward about 30 minutes later. This was sent out just about 30 minutes ago. Quote, the CFP commissioners have formally approved the addition of Utah AD Mark Harlan to the selection committee and Arkansas AD Hunter I believe it's Yurachek. I think that's how you say that. Arkansas AD Hunter Yurachek as the group's new chair, sources tell Yahoo Sports. So according to Ross Dellinger, Mark is now on the committee, and Hunter Yurachek is the new chair of the committee. So, as Porter was just discussing, let's do a little exercise here and have a little fun and maybe misbehave on a Thursday afternoon. What will the conversation sound like in this market if Utah handles their final 3 games and they beat all 3 teams handily? They beat all 3 teams the way they beat Cincinnati, the way they beat Colorado, the way that they, more or less have beaten teams when they've actually been able to win. Other than the 2 times they've stubbed their toe, Utah more or less has been stomping teams. UCLA, Arizona State, Colorado, Cincinnati, just total ass kickings. At Baylor, coming up on Saturday, reminder, 5 o'clock Mountain Time is that kick. It'll be on ESPN2. We'll begin our pregame coverage at 1 o'clock. Coming up on Saturday, that guy will have you taken care of, Porter Larson. And then it's K-State here in Salt Lake. We do not have a start time for that game just yet. And then it's at Kansas, a little post-Thanksgiving matchup with the Jayhawks. So if Utah goes to Waco, smokes Baylor. If K-State rolls into Salt Lake and they get smacked the way that some of these other schools have, then they handle their business against Kansas. And on the other side, what I perceive to be the most likely scenario, by the way, BYU also wins their final 3 games, okay? 4.5-point favorite at home, coming up against TCU Saturday night at Lavelle. That's an 8:15 kick. BYU's really good at home at Lavelle Edwards Stadium. Then a couple of more contests at Cincinnati, then home against UCF. UCF is an unserious football team this year, and I just don't think Cincinnati matches up well with BYU. Saturday night could get a little dicey. Okay, could. TCU is the 3rd best run defense in the conference. Of course, BYU, like Utah, they really want to run the football. Could not run the football against Tech, and we saw what happened to young Bear Bachmeier. And TCU's got a quarterback that can fling it. BYU with 12 interceptions on the season, they're going to have to make sure that their secondary is dialed in. But I'm going away from the point. Bottom line is I think BYU wins on Saturday. And I think BYU beats Cincinnati. And I think BYU will handle UCF relatively easily. But let's play this tape forward. Let's say the TCU game on Saturday, even though I think BYU will win, let's say that line is pretty accurate. And Josh Hoover rolls into Lavelle Edwards Stadium in Provo, and he's slinging it. And BYU ends up winning that game, 28-27. And let's say they go to Cincinnati, handle their business against Cincinnati, and I think that they will because I don't think it's a good matchup. But let's say it's like 24-21. And then UCF, whatever. It doesn't matter because they're unserious. So BYU does that. 2 close games in our final 3, but they get the wins. Utah handles their business, but they blow out all 3 teams left on their schedule. And then the final iteration of the college football playoff rankings has Texas Tech in because the other dynamic that would have to fall into place here, because obviously if BYU is able to handle their business, they will match up with Texas Tech and Arlington. And for the sake of this hypothetical misbehaving conversation, the rematch against Texas Tech looks a lot like what we saw last week in Lubbock, and BYU gets their heads kicked in. So that would put Texas Tech in, of course, as your automatic qualifier out of the Big 12. And if Utah handles their business in the way that we're kind of outlined here, and BYU gets smoked in the Big 12 championship game, could we see Tech in as your auto bid and then Utah in as your at-large over BYU, who has lost the conference championship game? With Mark Harlan now on the college football playoff committee, can you imagine what our friends on the interwebs who cheer for Brigham Young will have to say about that scenario? Now, a lot of hypotheticals have to fall into place here, and a lot of things have to, bounce Utah's way, and certainly plenty of football left to be played. But today's news does add an interesting wrinkle to how we're going to handle this conversation when it comes to the potential of Utah, and that door is still open for either a Big 12 championship appearance should BYU stub their toe, or potentially an at-large berth as a result of the way the College Football Playoff Committee has already told us how they think about Utah. With the advanced metrics we have referenced every single day that the College Football Playoff Committee themselves tell us they're using, S&P Plus with Utah at 7 and BYU down at 22. The College Football Power Index with Utah at 9 and BYU at 17. It's very much not out of the realm of possibility that even if BYU makes it to the Big 12 championship game and Utah does not, Utah gets in the 12-team college football playoff field as an at-large, while BYU would be left home. And, of course, BYU, your argument is very simple. We beat them. I don't get it. Well, the College Football Playoff Committee has been very clear that they're using plenty of advanced metrics, not just head-to-head, not just strength of record, not just strength of schedule, but also who are you right now? What kind of team are you right now? Not who were you a month and a half ago. Who were you to start the season, as they're reflecting with Notre Dame, who lost 2 games to start the year. They've just run off 7 straight. And their 2 losses to start the year were actually to 2 very good football teams. They will analyze Utah and BYU and everybody else about who they think those teams. And if you get in, if you're Utah, and if you're out, if you're BYU, the Mark Harlan dynamic throws a really interesting wrinkle into all of this. But we'll continue this conversation. We have Bill Bush coming up. More college football with Coach Bush coming up, and then Kyle Bonagura. We'll unwrap a lot of this with Kyle. Howard Beck for some NBA, Sam Bruckhouse for some NFL. A surprisingly busy Thursday show, and it's great to have you with us right here on ESPN 700. Rod Stewart with special guest Richard Marks is taking over the Utah First Credit Union Amphitheater on Friday, June the 19th. So if you are a 58-year-old single woman on Hinge, start swiping and get a date. And text 877-353-0700 to win tickets to see Rod Stewart with special guest Richard Marks.
Guess who won yesterday?
Who's that?
A 58-year-old woman.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, that is this demographic. Rod Stewart's one of those artists that I don't know that I've ever heard anybody be like, yeah, I love Rod Stewart. I don't know anyone in my life that enjoys Rod Stewart's music, yet he sells millions of records.
I was going to say, I've heard plenty of songs on the radio and, maybe out shopping or something, but yeah, I've never necessarily met someone be like, hey, headed to the Rod Stewart concert this week or otherwise. But to our lucky listener yesterday and maybe today in June, they'll be headed out there.
I'm more surprised that we have 58-year-old women listening to the show. It's not
shout out.
I mean, we want all the listeners, and we're not, we're not specific about who we want to listen to the show. I just didn't think that was our demographic. But if you are a boomer looking for a date and a concert, the drive is your home.
Shout out Elaine.
And her name is Elaine?
Yeah.
Shout out Elaine. Enjoy Rod Stewart, Richard Marks coming up at Utah First Credit Union Amphitheater Friday, June the 19th. It's a long ways away, but 877-353-0700 win tickets to see Rod Stewart. All right. We're a little fluid here with the guests. We're going to bring in Bill Bush. We've got Kyle Bonagura. Howard Beck is going to join us for some NBA Daily Assist. Sam Bruckhouse will stop by. If you missed the start of the show, we open with the breaking news that Mark Harlan is now on the College Football Playoff Committee. Utah's athletic director was added officially about an hour ago. The College Football Playoff Commissioners formally approved the addition of Mark. And the new chair is Hunter Yurachek. He's the Arkansas athletic director after it was announced earlier today that Mack Rhoades has taken a leave of absence from Baylor as the athletic director and, of course, as the College Football Playoff Committee chair. We don't know exactly what's going on with Mark Rhoades. There was an investigation into a confrontation he had with a football player, a tight end who plays for the Baylor Bears. Baylor has been relatively free of scandal since the Art Briles stuff, and that, of course, was an absolute mess. I want to say when it comes to Mack Rhoades, he was kind of credited for cleaning things up, and he was given like a 10-year deal like 2 years ago. Ross Dellinger has reported the new allegations surfacing this week regarding Baylor AD Mack Rhoades are related to a violation of the faith-based university's policies and practices. Sources are telling Yahoo Sports Baylor is declining to comment as this involves, quote, a personal matter and an ongoing investigation. So if anything comes down, we'll bring it your way. But, of course, Mark Harlan is now on the College Football Playoff Committee and preparing for Armageddon if Utah is able to get into the CFP and BYU is not. We'll get back to this. Kyle Bonagura is going to join us. But first guest on a Thursday afternoon. Always a pleasure to catch up with a national championship-winning college coach. Bill Bush, how are you, sir?
Doing great. Thank you guys very much for having me. Appreciate that.
Appreciate the time, Coach. Before we look forward, let's look back. Now, Utah was on a bye, so no new games to talk about with the Utes. But BYU went down to Lubbock and simply lost, Coach, to a team that I feel might be a top 5 team. College Football Playoff Committee somewhat agrees. They're at 6. Texas Tech is really good. But, unfortunately for BYU, they entered that game with a big portion of college football people having a lot of questions about whether or not they're elite, and then a lot of support because they simply had been undefeated. And as a result of getting their heads kicked in a little bit, I think the question still remains, like, how good is this BYU team? But what did you make of Tech beating BYU 29-7?
I got a chance to watch the entire game. A couple things was from the big scope of things that it was pretty easy to see that the team that appeared to be the more talented team won. I don't think it was a fluke by any stretch, and a lot of it has to do with just up front play, especially with the defensive line play, is the part that was where it really played out for them. It was very interesting to get a chance to watch it, and then they just had they had answers for everything defensively is the best way that I could put it. And they just really had BYU corralled, especially the quarterback, from really getting anything going. And I thought there was always going to be a chance for them to kind of get things turned a little bit, but it was one of those days too. It was quite a sight there. I mean, that was a big game, the energy in that stadium at Texas Tech. So I think BYU was up against a lot of things, but it was very interesting. And I agree with your comment that this Texas Tech team can hang in there with a lot of teams.
And I will follow up with kind of the final portion of my first question, because I do think BYU is very good. And I do think they have been somewhat fortunate over the past couple of years when it comes to Lady Luck being on their side, but also I've been doing this a long time. I've been in sports my whole life. Any team that's won a championship needs a little luck. You just need it. You need health on your side. You need a random happenstance, circumstantial situation to go your way. Like, it's not a knock to say that they've been somewhat advantageous with certain dynamics, but I still think they're good, Coach. How good do you think BYU is this year?
Boy, I think they're awful good. I agree with what you're saying. When you have to have a few breaks on different things that happen, the number of times I've seen Alabama win a national championship and have a game or two along the lines where you kind of go, wow, they were lucky to win that. Well, where they were not, but there's always a couple things that have to kind of go your way to have some things like that happen. And BYU's had that happen to them over the past couple of years, but I just chalk that up to really good coaching and really good teams. I don't chalk it up to luck when they keep having those long runs of success in between. I think they're really good. I think that the quarterback Bear looked a little bit more like a freshman in this game a couple times than what he has in the past from watching him. And a lot of that just had to do with kind of an overwhelming front from defense that they had. But like I said, there would be a lot of teams that would really struggle going to Texas Tech and playing in that place. So I also didn't walk away from like, well, the quarterback's just not quite ready. This is too much for him. I just walked away with it more that they just really walked into a buzzsaw. I still think they're a very, very good team with obviously, things go hot and cold really, really quick in sports, and all of a sudden it's like, well, that didn't work out for them. Well, they're still in awful good shape with where they are right now with what they can finish up and do and have a chance to get back in that championship game. Yeah,
the dynamic of starting a true freshman, I think, is a really interesting thing topically to dig into. And to your point, Bear's been really, really good. And, Aaron Roderick is a sharp offensive coordinator and a sharp offensive mind. He would not have handed the keys to the car to Bear if he didn't believe in him. Bears third in the conference in QBR. So despite, what we saw at Texas Tech, ultimately this kid has really stepped up and played some solid football, even though he's so young. We had Jim Herman on to start the season prior to I think it was the first week of the season we had Jim on. And of course he played defensive line for that 1984 national championship BYU team. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he essentially said, since we're starting a true freshman quarterback, I'm going to assume there's probably 2 losses on the schedule that are just a result of his inexperience and 1 loss on the schedule. Of course, not all on Bear, but with your coaching experience, what are the wild card dynamics of going with a kid at that position that does not have any experience playing college football?
There is a couple wild cards, and luckily, so we've all been through them at some point in time. And I've been lucky enough. Tommy Frazier played as a true freshman when I was a graduate assistant at Nebraska, and obviously turned into a heck of a college quarterback and led to the team to a couple national championships. There's always a couple wild cards with it, but at the same time, when someone can just play, they can just play, and that's kind of what I see in Bear, that he can just play. And the moments are not too big for him. I didn't walk away from watching that game thinking the moment was too big and it was just freshman air. I think it was a classic example of just on this particular day, and maybe at this exact time, that Texas Tech was just a little bit better. And you're going to have some, because he still had command of the team. He still understood what was going on. You didn't see a panic. So, I mean, right now, if I'm BYU, I'm pretty ecstatic. I've got a true freshman quarterback. We still have a great chance to make the college football playoffs. And would you have said that, when everything went down, 7-8 months ago? Would you have thought that at BYU? And I think they're still in great shape. At the same time, your future is incredible.
Yeah, my guess is at the start of the season, if you ask anybody down there, hey, after 9 games, can I sell you on 8-1? I think everybody probably would have signed up.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, and you watch it. The big thing that I always look for on quarterbacks is the moment too big for them. There's just certain things that you just tell they're overwhelmed with, and that's one thing that he wasn't even in that game. And I haven't seen him, and he's been in some tests. I mean, I watched that Arizona game. I watched several games they've been in, and obviously the Utah game. We know what a pressure packed game that is. And so he's been able to handle all those things. So that's the one thing I'd be the least of my worries would be my concern of like whether, well, I don't know about the quarterback if he can still get us back to the championship game. Can he still get us to the playoffs? Absolutely, he can.
Before we move over to Utah, let me get a thought from you as it pertains to what BYU's up against Saturday night. Now, a Saturday night matchup at LaVell Edwards Stadium is problematic. BYU's really good there at night. It's an 8:15 kick. Now, Josh Hoover, the quarterback for TCU, leads the conference in pass efficiency. Sawyer Robertson from Baylor is actually 2, and we'll get there in a moment. BYU has 12 interceptions on the season. The secondary has been pretty good, and the defense actually continued to give them a shot against Texas Tech a week ago. It really was the offense that couldn't get rolling. Now, TCU is 3rd in the conference in run defense, which actually kind of surprised me a little bit. BYU's a 4.5-point favorite at home, Coach, so it's not a massive line. What do you see happening coming up Saturday night down in Provo?
Well, I've been fortunate to see TCU play a lot and seen Hoover play. They, being TCU, had every chance to win the game down at Arizona State, and it just didn't come up for them. They had a couple plays that just didn't quite go their way. I couldn't have been more shocked at their game against Iowa State. I think Iowa State had lost 4 in a row, and then they had found a way to go down there. I think that game was 20-17 that they won. I was a little surprised to see the number the way it was because I felt BYU would probably be a bigger favorite than what they are right now. And then part of that factors into I just don't know if sometimes I'm sure they see the numbers and those that make the spreads understand it very well. But my experience, and as you guys know well, playing at LaVell Edwards Stadium at night is brutal. That's as tough a place to play as there is, and they'll be a very invested team by BYU coming in there with everything at stake. So I would be surprised that BYU doesn't win this game by more. I wouldn't surprise me to see it a 10 to 14-point game, but that's also why you play it. But the quarterback position for TCU with Hoover, he does always put a scare in you because he has the ability to kind of get on a heater and do some things, and so that's always a concern. I know Jay will have him ready to go. Hill in great shape, but I feel very confident about BYU going into this game.
Over to the Utes, who, after losing to BYU, is clearly were a little bit ticked off and took their anger out on both Colorado and Cincinnati. And I was on the sideline for both games. It was over at halftime. Before we get to Baylor, just from your experience and knowing Whit, what do you think they utilized this bye week to accomplish prior to the stretch run of the season?
Well, I'd imagine in some areas, usually what the great coaches do is they go back on some things and sometimes they just go back during that bye week and you get back to some fundamental parts, some certain things we need to let's just get ourselves back to right. You focus on yourself more than you do the other team. I'm sure that is something that they were able to focus on. And at the same time, like they're just worried about what can we get done, this week being 1-0. And if there's all this, conversation, obviously they're not in the crazy spot. I think they're 13th right now in the CFP. But what can we do to get back to just doing what we do best? And then you spend a lot of time on yourself and self-scouting. And so you really want to see if you can break some habits, both defensively and offensively, to go back and say, guys, there's quite a tendency on what we're doing in second and long offensively, or same thing we're doing in situations on third down defensively. So what can we do to really take a long look at ourselves? We can break some tendencies and maybe we can change things up to be able to finish this season off in great fashion. But that's always what the elite coaches do, is they want to get back to just practicing really well, being efficient. How are we blocking? How are we tackling? How are we getting off blocks? And then we'll really stress ourselves to get ourselves back into the game plan, jump into that, heavily for next week. There's always a section of game plan, but you just want to get back to doing things against yourself and what can we do to improve ourselves.
I've been saying this all week, Coach, but if you're a college football fan and you make it to mid-November with something tangible to hope for the team you cheer for, you're in a very good spot. The majority of college football teams at this point are either playing for bowl eligibility or trying to, play their way up to a better bowl. But both BYU and Utah, everything is on the line. And the CFP committee is telling us that they really like Utah despite the 2 losses. So when you look at where Utah's at right now, they're at 13 overall in the CFP rankings. But if you dig in, and you and I have discussed these advanced metrics, S&P Plus has Utah as the 7th best team in the country, and Football Power Index has Utah as the 9th best team in the country. Do you feel like Utah still, at this point, should be considered a top 10 team in college football?
They should still be considered. Their backdrop when BYU went to 12th, and that's as good as Utah could go as 13th, with a difference in 1 loss in a head-to-head game in that spot. So that was like impossible to be in a better spot than that at that time. They're definitely considered to be that. And I did it just my own study on the top 25 college football playoffs, and there's 4 or 5 teams in there that have no chance in the top 25 of making to the playoffs. And there's a couple teams that aren't even in there that have a chance, like a Duke, and there's one of the team that have a chance to be able to still maybe make the playoffs because of their chance at a conference championship in an ACC 1-loss situation. So with where they're at, the only thing that Utah doesn't have is they don't have a clear path. They don't have a path. You just say, some teams you can say, if we win out, we will have a great chance. Utah is still going to need some help, and they're going to need a little bit of carnage, and they need some losses to be able to help to do that. But the only thing you can worry about before that time, just like you said, you are in the conversation. And right now, you can't say that it's always going to be, well, it's just that simple. Because if you look at the teams right now they're down to 5 apart, but Miami and Notre Dame both have the same record. They both have quality losses, and they played head-to-head, and they're not – and they're 5 apart, and I think they're 4 or 5 apart, and they were 8 apart at one point in time. So it won't come down to just head-to-head. There's more to it when things kind of even out a little bit, which the CFP has shown that in the Notre Dame situation. So that always gives you a chance for being positive. If all of a sudden, where does it end up if BYU loses again and Utah wins out? There's still a lot of options out there, and both teams are extremely alive. But right now there's about 24 teams that are alive, and there's 134 that play for the playoffs. So just like you said, you nailed it, that there's a lot of hope still when you wake up every morning.
Tell me how you would digest the following scenario, and we'll end with your thoughts on Utah Baylor in just a moment. But ESPN has what they call their playoff predictor. And according to their percentages, Utah with a 36% chance of making it into the CFP and BYU with a 27% chance of making it into the CFP. If BYU wins the rest of their games and they go to the Big 12 championship game and they get smoked by Tech, and then Utah wins the rest of their games and they do it convincingly the way they have over the past couple of games, Tech gets in as the auto bid from the Big 12, and then Utah gets in as the at-large bid out of the Big 12, and BYU's left out, even though they have the head-to-head. How would you, as a coach, digest that scenario if it went down?
Obviously, for myself, it'd be hard for me, and you know what a Utah fan I am, but it would be hard for me to take that one because the College Football Playoff Committee has made a big point that they're not going to try to punish you for the extra data point. Which means they're making the championship game and then not be able to win it. So if it came down to them making the championship game, losing, now what would have to happen, obviously, would have to be losing, like you said, 49-3. That part can look different. And also what goes on with the CFP is what happens injury-wise, which means during one of these games, there's a major injury to a team. If BYU gets beat by, say, they make their way back and they play Texas Tech and they get beat, and there's a major injury, and that major injury usually has to be the quarterback. And so they factor that in, which is kind of crazy, but they do factor it in. And so they'll still have a chance, but that would be hard to digest for anyone, I would think, if you said our record's the same, we went to the Big 12 championship game. We lost the Big 12 championship game, and now someone that we beat with the same record that didn't make that has one less data point gets in. That would be hard as just from the big scope away from myself looking at it.
Yeah, and I totally understand. I mean, of course, we are the flagship home of the Utes, and I would love to have Utah in no matter what the process looks like. But head-to-head, it just has to matter. Like, it just has to matter. And if that's a tough pill for Ute fans to swallow, I get it. But if we're not valuing the games that are actually played, Coach, it feels just a little disingenuous, does it not?
Oh, it does. Like I said, I was taken back by the Notre Dame Miami one, where they both had 2 losses. They were at one point in time, Notre Dame was 10th and Miami was 18th, and they both have quality losses, and they played head to head. So you'd think that'd be the first thing, and then or you'd be 1 or 2 apart, and they weren't. If you don't value the head to head, unless you just have some form of a horrific loss, or I mean, head to head does not matter. If you beat somebody head to head, but now you've lost 3 or 4, eventually your total body of work does factor in. But when everything's even at that time, sometimes they'll go back and look, and they'll say, okay, if they look at the BYU-Utah game, it's going to be, were they completely healthy at this time? Was Utah completely healthy at the quarterback position? They played well. They had chances. They had the lead. Playing at BYU is very difficult. But still, in the end, if it was reversed, the Utah fans would lose their minds.
Yeah.
If it was a reverse scenario. So I'm really big on the head-to-head. You know what I want to have happen as far as I'd love to see them both in, but like I said, I'd love to have however it works out. I sure want Utah to have a chance because the way they're playing right now is that they are good enough to be in that 12-team playoff. And they're good enough to win a game and host a home game potentially and all those things. So you just hope that the couple things play out. And there will be some craziness that happens yet. There will be some things you're going to go, oh, wow, how that happens and what all goes on. And even next week will be a lot of fun with in Oklahoma playing against Alabama. Something's going to give. Something's going to happen. So there's a lot of things, and there'll be something, obscure. What happens if Pitt beats Notre Dame? That would knock Notre Dame completely out. And then Pitt still has to play Miami, and they still have to play Georgia Tech. And so there's so many scenarios yet, and that's why you always have to, it's hard to focus, but you got to focus on yourself. And then also they being the CFP committee, they look at how you're playing. Sometimes you'll hear them actually say, but have you seen them play? And so if you're playing really well, like Utah is right now, in dispatching of Cincinnati, that's a really, really good and a big win for them. So hopefully that has a chance to carry over.
Before I set you loose, to your point, focus on the task at hand. And for Utah, it's the Baylor Bears in Waco. Sawyer Robertson, Baylor's quarterback, is second to Josh Hoover in pass efficiency in the conference. And they really go, Coach, as he goes. And there are 4 wins over P4 teams. SMU, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, and then they beat UCF before their bye. There's this metric PFF uses for passes of over 10 yards. His grade is 90.7 in the 4 wins, which would be 5th in the nation. 53% completion on chunk passes, 12-plus passes of success rate, and then only 4 turnover-type throws when he tries to go down the field in wins. In the 4 losses, he falls off the table. His grade is 59.2. That would be second worst in the conference. Completes about 38% of his passes over 10 yards and has 9 throws that essentially are turnover risk when it comes to chunk plays. So in wins, he's great. In losses, he's not. And you were good to kind of educate us on Utah's man-to-man kind of defensive approach under Morgan Scalley. That, to me, is where this comes down. Utah's a 7.5-point favorite. Baylor's the 6th worst run defense of the P4 teams, and we know what Utah likes to do. It feels like the advantage is with the Utes, but road games in November can get tricky. What do you think happens in Waco?
They always get tricky. So I've watched so much Baylor football, it's nauseating. It's simply like why are you an expert on Baylor football? Well, I know that staff really well. Myself and Dave Aranda coached together at Utah State, Wisconsin, and at LSU. And so I've always followed that very, very closely on how that plays out. And I don't know if there is any more, like you just mentioned, the quarterback play. Their whole play is like that. I saw them play against UCF a week ago, or whatever it was, and it looked as if they might win 80-0. And I've also seen them play in other games, and it's just bad ball. But the one thing I have seen, which is pretty shocking with Dave really running the defense, is that they've struggled so much on defensively, and especially like you said in the run game. The biggest advantage is Utah's offensive line in that spot. And so I guess the matchup for this game heavily leans towards Utah. There's some certain matchup you go, well, I like this and I like this. When you get the favorite matchup you can ever want in football is that we have a better offensive line than you have a defensive front and defensive line. That's your favorite thing. If there's one thing you want to have, it's like that. And then you'll be able to, because there's always so many things you can expand off of it. You know, you have an athletic quarterback at Utah. You have a lot of weapons also, but that offensive line is where the whole thing lies. So you go into a game, you're like, we're very deficient at D-line compared to their O-line, and you're in scramble mode. And so generally what will happen, you'll see defensively teams try to do some different gimmick things, not only gimmick, but some different things, a little more aggressive. And you might see some plays that don't go well, and then you'll see some big plays where they'll pop some things. That's kind of what I think will happen. The matchup of Coach Scalley's defense and watching those DBs, they can match up with Baylor. So in this particular case, and I know I always sound like a homer because I've never not really picked Utah, but the matchup screams Utah.
Coach, thank you for the insight. Appreciate the time on this Thursday. Enjoy the weekend of games ahead, and we'll chat soon.
Awesome. You guys are the best. I appreciate it. Go Utes.
Bill Bush hopping on with us. Not just me, but with us.
I should ask a question.
Who was the who was my guy that called me
that
your name?
Actually thought it was me.
Oh, Pete Nystrom.
Thor.
Damn it.
Come on now. You don't forget that guy's name.
No, you don't. The Big 12 has released a statement. I'm sure Brett Yormark was thrilled to release a statement on Mark Harlan. Quote, Mark Harlan is an excellent choice to serve as the Big 12 Conference's representative on the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. This is Brett Yormark. Mark's previous experience on the committee will serve the interests of all college football alongside the other committee members. The question is, did Brett Yormark himself say that, or was he just like, dude, just send something, be nice, just send an email?
Is he a ChatGPT guy?
Potentially. This is, it feels a little Chat GPT-ish, but if you missed it, Mark Harlan has been added to the College Football Playoff Committee after Mack Rhoades took his leave. We'll talk more about this. We've got 1 hour in the books. We've got 3 hours to go before we send it to Thursday Night Football between the Jets and the Patriots. Kyle Bonneger is our guest coming up next right here on ESPN 700. Can we find enough bumps today from Rod Stewart and Richard Marks to make it through 4 hours of radio is the question. This is legitimately, and we're giving away tickets. We're not just jamming out to Richard Marks and Rod Stewart today. This is the only Richard Marks song that I know. I don't know any other song that he's written. Are you familiar with any other Richard Marks tunes?
No, not off the top of my head. I'll have to get back to you on that one.
I was today years old when I learned that Richard Marks just released an album featuring Kenny G. So there's that.
Well, I mean, to be clear, there has been new music recently from the Rolling Stones, the deceased Waylon Jennings, just all over the map, like people you would not expect new music from, and a lot of it's been awesome. So
I'm sure none of the awesome music involved Richard Marks, but I'm sure our guest is very, very confused. Kyle Bonagura, do you have a hot take on either Rod Stewart or Richard Marks for us on a Thursday?
Well, as you guys were kind of getting through that, I pulled up, as one does, the Richard Marks Wikipedia page, and I'm really ready to get into this if need be. So let me know if you have any questions about Grammy Awards, Billboard Music Awards. The list goes on.
Okay, all right. As one does, he says, pulls up the Richard Marks Wikipedia page. We're giving away tickets to the concert coming up, so we're not just jamming out to these two.
Hey, you don't need to apologize for anything, Spence. You got to do what you got to do to get through 4 hours, like you said.
No, I appreciate you. All right, some interesting news surfaced earlier today. Let's unpack this for our listeners that may have missed it. And there is a local tie here. So there was a really weird report about Mack Rhoades kind of getting into it with a Baylor tight end, a very good player, for a T-shirt he was wearing before the game. But the news today that Mack Rhoades has taken a leave of absence, according to the school, has nothing to do with that incident. And when it comes to the information that we have, the allegations are something related to violating a faith-based institution's policies. So we have that on one side. Now, the other piece of the story that broke earlier today is the Big 12 recommended Mark Harlan to replace Mack Rhoades, and the College Football Playoff Commissioners have ratified it, and Mark Harlan is officially now a member of the College Football Playoff Committee. Kyle, so give me your thoughts on this random story that broke not too long ago today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious. There's too many unknowns, I guess, with the Rhoades piece to understand like what might have happened, right? So it would be all speculation about that. But I guess like the knee-jerk reaction is, wow, that's like he was on TV 2 days ago, breaking down the CFP rankings, and so to go from in the hot seat Tuesday night to completely out by Thursday morning is quite the change there. So I'll be curious to hear more about kind of the reasons behind that. But it's interesting that Harlan steps into the seat. They needed to replace Rhoades with someone from the Big 12. He had been on the committee before, so I think it became a pretty easy process to get him approved by the fellow committee members. They wanted a sitting AD to be in that chair as well. So yeah, he's kind of the obvious choice, but it does invite. People can speculate now. You enter someone whose team is very much in the mix. Like, how does that, what does that look like, right? You're supposed to sit out any discussions related to Utah, so you'll be able to, influence the committee in theory, right? But it's always fascinating when there is someone on the committee whose schools will be involved in the discussions. Another
interesting angle here, Kyle, is last year when BYU rolled up to Salt Lake and beat Utah here at Rice-Eccles Stadium. Mark Harlan took to the podium and expressed himself, and I'll leave it there. You can look it up, kids, if you want to Google it. And among the things he said were not so flattering things about the Big 12 Conference. He was reprimanded and fined by Brett Yormark. So I found it interesting that according to the reports, it was the Big 12 who recommended Mark Harlan, and then Brett Yormark released this statement just a few minutes ago, quote, Mark Harlan is an excellent choice to serve as the Big 12 Conference's representative on the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. Mark's previous experience on the committee will serve the interest of all college football alongside the other committee members. A rather innocuous statement, but I'm not trying to reach for topics here. Is this an indicator that maybe water under the bridge and nothing to see here? I just was kind of surprised that it was the Big 12 who recommended Mark based off of what happened a year ago.
Yeah, I thought about that too when I saw that he was going to be representing the conference, because I was at that game when he went off in the podium after the game, and the pointed comments about the Big 12. He is not happy to be part of the conference today, something to that effect, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think the conference and probably your mark can look back at that and say, look, that's kind of heat of the moment, and sometimes people say stuff that they shouldn't have. He took his medicine, paid the fine, everyone moves on, right? And, Mark's a highly respected member of the athletic director community. So I think that, you kind of get a pass for acting out of turn on occasion if you have some built-up goodwill. So, yeah, I definitely had the same thought, though, that it's, here we are a little bit more than a year later, and now he's, everyone's singing Kumbaya.
Moving off this dynamic, let's just talk about a little bit currently where we find ourselves. And as you and I discussed a week ago, the only thing BYU could not do in Lubbock is the one thing that they did do, and that's get their brakes blown off. I've said all week, for me, that's about Tech. And I was on the sideline watching Tech dismantle Utah in the fourth quarter after a three-quarter rock fight, and watched every minute of Texas Tech BYU, and have watched quite a bit of Texas Tech this year. I just think they're the class of the conference. And honestly, I don't know if it really is that close. We'll get into some metrics and numbers that indicate Utah might live in their cul-de-sac. But what were your takeaways after watching Tech dismantle BYU 29-7?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that it says more about Tech than anything. It just kind of reaffirms that they are the best team in the conference. It probably isn't close. The one game they lost against Arizona State, you're missing your starting quarterback. So, we saw how Arizona State kind of got a pass with the rankings last year when that was the case when they had their only loss with Sam Levitt at a certain point, right? So that matters for the committee rankings, and he's back on the field, and the game was never in doubt, right? Texas Tech put it to bed, a lot earlier than they did against Utah, so you can kind of read into that how you want on an individual basis, I guess. But yeah, like Texas Tech's clearly the best team in the conference, and then it gets interesting when you start talking about Utah and BYU, because there is the head-to-head game, but it was close. It was in Provo, and now if the teams win out, BYU would then have a chance to lose again or win again, I guess, too, right? And so it's going to be it presents a really compelling debate to be had, because, say, if you game it out, Utah is at 10-2, BYU is 11-1 with a win over Utah. At that point, there was no way to justify Utah ahead of BYU, right? Better record, head-to-head win, case closed. But they are only one spot apart in the rankings now. And so if they don't look great down the stretch, if they're winning close games like they have all year, and then they aren't close again against Texas Tech, like, how does that impact the committee's perception of BYU? And does it matter, right? Are they at a spot in the kind of where the threshold is, where the line will be, where will it matter at all, right? You could imagine a scenario where it's between those two for the final spot, or they're both below the cut line. So a lot of meaningful football to be played here.
I'm a well-known abuser of the NBA trade machine on ESPN.com. So obviously I'm a big fan of the playoff predictor. Well, excuse me, the All-State playoff predictor. Let's take care of the sponsor on ESPN.com. And right now, that model has Utah as a 36% chance of getting into the 12-team CFP, and BYU is a 27% chance. So if you use the model and play it through, Utah beats Baylor, they beat Kansas State, and they beat Kansas. Their final three matchups. And then the final exercise in this model is, will Utah win its conference championship game? You have three options. One is yes, one is no, and the other one is doesn't make the game. And I picked doesn't make the game because I actually think BYU is going to win out as well. And if Utah, according to the ESPN, playoff predictor, shout out All-State, if they win their final three games, 60% chance to make the CFP, they would get in as the number 10 seed, and they would play Ole Miss as the 7 seed. Now, according to the model, the assumption is BYU wins out, goes to the Big 12 championship game, and loses to Tech, and they're left out. Tech is in at 6, Utah's in at 10, but BYU has the head-to-head. Mark Harlan's on the CFP committee. It would be a wild scenario here in this market if Utah, as a 2-loss team, gets in over BYU as a 2-loss team, and BYU's 2 losses are both to Tech and one's in the Big 12 championship game. I mean, it's hard for me to wrap my mind around, Kyle, because I do believe head-to-head has to matter, but I'm just using this model and the percentages, what would your reaction be if a 10-2 Utah team gets in over, well, I guess what would be an 11-2 BYU team with 2 losses to Tech, 1 being in the conference championship game?
Yeah, I think if it plays out like that, I would have a hard time seeing any logic in putting Utah ahead of BYU. Even if you look, there's more context to say Utah wins by 30 in every game the rest of the way, and BYU kind of skates by, right? Win by a field goal, win by 2, whatever, over the last few games, and then get blasted by BYU. Like, that probably matters to a certain degree in terms of evaluating like who the better team is, because I think that like, at the end of the day, like that's what they're trying to do. Who is the better team? And margin of victory doesn't always matter, but it does matter to some degree when you're kind of trying to slot these teams appropriately. But yeah, if you're 11, I think there's no argument to be had if it's 11-1 BYU, 10-2 Utah, BYU beat Utah, right? Like there's no justification. Even if like on a neutral field with perfect weather, the consensus is that Utah is the better team and would win if they were to play again. Like, I don't think that part should matter as much as what the results were, right? And and also Utah's losses to Texas Tech also, right? So it's not like they beat the team who BYU lost to a couple of times. They're like, there's no way to, say this team beat this team and find a way to make the arrow point to Utah. But at the same time, they kind of allowed for the possibility to make that call that, doesn't really make sense logically, in that they dropped them 5 spots. Right. And so the committee is very clear about, hey, like, we think these teams are very close. The game showed it was very close. And I guess you could make the case that, at the end of the year, they could feel that Utah is the better team, and maybe that's good enough. But it's a fascinating one for it to be rival schools, in-state, all of that, and lining up for a very dramatic conclusion.
I need you to help me understand a dynamic here, because it feels like there's a small chance that the ACC could be shut out entirely. Now, I was kind of unpacking this topic last night during the show, and I received a text from somebody that I'll just say would know better than I would, that the ACC gets an auto bid and it doesn't matter who wins the conference. But when you look at the changes that they made, my understanding is it's the top 5 conference champions, and it goes based off of rankings when it comes to what the CFP believes. So, for instance, now Duke has this weird pathway into the ACC championship game because they have 1 conference loss, and right now Duke is unranked. So, like, help me understand here. Like, if Duke wins the ACC championship game, but South Florida wins the American, and James Madison wins the Sun Belt, and South Florida and James Madison are ranked ahead of Duke, doesn't Duke get left out in that scenario? I mean, am I understanding that correctly?
No, that's right. It doesn't. There's no designation for power conferences. It's not the 4 power conferences plus the group of 5. It is the top 5 ranked conference champions. So the situation you laid out is my favorite scenario right now. Duke with 4, I think that possibility took a hit this week when San Diego State lost, because they were, if San Diego State at 12-1, I thought would have been a really interesting candidate, right? Because then you have the American champion, and they could lose. There could be some losses there too. But you could then there was 3 possibilities, right? You could have, if James Madison won out, American champ wins out, and San Diego State wins out. Then you had the potential for 3 1-loss champions, and then like a 4-loss Duke. And like I just couldn't, I couldn't see Duke getting in overall, like, getting in if that was the scenario presented. But yeah, it's not a guarantee that the ACC is in. There's still so many games we played to have a great sense of it if it's really in jeopardy. But there are certainly scenarios you can draw up where the ACC is not a part of the playoff. Which is hilarious. It's just funny.
It is. It's absolutely hilarious. I thought I was understanding that correctly, but I received a text and maybe second guess. I'm glad that I was at least, because some of this stuff, man, with the adjustments they make every year, trying to read the tea leaves as far as what exactly the committee is emphasizing, advanced metrics, strength of record, strength of schedule, and then current form, which is another interesting thing where it kind of brings in the dynamic we were discussing earlier. Ever since losing to Brigham Young, Utah has responded, and they've played angry. And if they continue to, by the time the final iteration of the CFP rankings are out, it'll be like 6 or 7 weeks since Utah lost to BYU. You know what I mean? So it just brings an interesting dynamic and somewhat hard to pinpoint as far as all the things that they're trying to identify.
And and going back to like the BYU Utah discussion, I mean, if Utah's been dominant in its wins, right, and BYU has not. So like you got to figure that matters. And if they continue, like I said, if they win by 30 the next 3 games, that'll be 5 straight to end the year in dominant fashion. Like how much weight do you put in that versus just the number in the standings, right? So I don't know. I like that we're having this discussion with this format as opposed to like what it would have been like in previous years where like none of these games mattered, right? Now you have so much meaningful football at the end of the year that like it's stunning to me that it took so long to get here where we could be in a spot where there's like a legitimate playoff. And like I think it could probably expand and these conversations get even more interesting because it involves more of the country. And I think that's always been my like why I've advocated for a playoff and a larger playoff is that like we want football games to matter. Like the teams at the top, all their games are going to matter regardless. But the teams who are kind of in that next tier, second and third tier, their late season games have been irrelevant for a while, and now we're discussing a lot of games that have real ramifications, and I think the sport is much better for that.
Yeah, and as a sports talk radio host, I mean, my goodness, like, give me all the content possible. So I agree with you. It's made the late season very relevant, and a couple of big games for our local teams coming up this weekend. TCU's in town to play BYU down in Provo. It's an 8:15 kick at Lavelle Edwards Stadium. That's a tough place to play at night, and BYU's very good when they play night games either Friday or Saturday. I was surprised to see the line at 4.5 and even a little bit more surprised to not see it move at all. So BYU, not a huge favorite at home. Josh Hoover leads the Big 12 in pass efficiency. BYU secondary has been good. They've got 12 picks. They're going to need to bounce back. Give me your thoughts on the potential of what we might see in Provo coming up on Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for both these teams, they've just been playing close games for several weeks, right? For the most part, there's been a couple exceptions, but they seem to always just be in a rock fight, regardless of who they're playing. Like both of these teams are teams that get up for their opponent, or they lower their levels if they're playing a weaker team for the most part. And so I just don't see this. I mean, I see it being close is I guess what I'm saying. And then like BYU's got to prove itself again after last week. And again, like Texas Tech was the protagonist in that one. They were the ones who forced the issue. And maybe it's not the most fair way to evaluate BYU based on just playing a team that's like significantly better up front. But yeah, they need to make a statement. And again, like they're getting a lot of credit for winning games as they should, but style points matter now. So it's not just about winning games anymore for BYU. It's about winning them convincingly. And, after watching the offense the last few weeks, I guess they were all right against Iowa State late, but like, I'm just not so impressed by how dynamic they are. I mean, Bear's an interesting player, but he's limited still as a true freshman. I think they've relied on his legs a little bit too much for my liking. So, if they're able to be a little bit more multiple, let him throw the ball a little bit better, put him into situations where he can connect on passes early and open up that part of the game. I think that's what I'd like to see from BYU in order to kind of get back on board with them finishing strong.
Both Utah and Baylor are coming off byes. Baylor goes the way of their quarterback. So I referenced Hoover being 1 in the Big 12 in pass efficiency. Sawyer Robertson is 2. In Baylor's 4 wins over P4 teams, he's been really, really good. In their losses against P4 teams, he's fallen completely more or less off the shelf. Utah's secondary, they're very, very good. There are a couple of injuries, unfortunately, to the safeties, but they rely heavily on man-to-man. That's Morgan Scalley's calling card. Ultimately, where I think this comes down to, Kyle, is Baylor's the 6th worst rush defense in P4, which is weird to say about a Dave Aranda team. Utah's the best rushing offense in the Big 12, and I think they're top 4 in the country. The line is Utah 7.5. It was up to 9.5, but it is settled. Utah's about a touchdown favorite down in Waco. What do you think we see?
Yeah, I feel really confident about Utah in this one. I just don't think Baylor, when it's played better teams this year, just hasn't shown up really. Maybe early in the year, but like over the last second half of the season so far, it's they kind of beat the teams they're supposed to, and then don't really compete against the better teams in the Big 12. And now you're going up against a team that maybe is the second best team in the conference, much more like one of the more physical teams in the country, and add it all up, and it doesn't look good for Baylor. So I would expect Utah to win, and I think that they can smell blood here, and it's like they also know, like we said it with BYU, like style points matter. Like it matters for everyone, right? Utah needs to continue to win and make its case, and I think if they get a lead, there's not going to be any letting up. They're very much incentivized to make that final score look as impressive as possible.
Before I say you lose, Kyle, there's this interesting dynamic with the coaching carousel, and as I understand it, Ole Miss has given Lane Kiffin a blank check to say, what's it going to take for you to stay? But LSU apparently, backdoor channels, has given him the same message. And then, according to reports, he wants the Florida job. But I don't know. I'm just kind of interested that Lane Kiffin seems to be the top candidate for both his job and two of the three best jobs available. How do you think this plays out?
So I think the way we evaluate jobs in this era is just so much different, right? Because, 10 years ago, where would you have put Texas Tech, right? But now with the financial backing that they have, the oil barons or whoever it is who are anteing up for big-time defensive linemen, like it changes everything. So, I mean, Ole Miss has been right there the last 2 years, right? They've supported the team so they can compete at, pretty damn near close to the highest level in college football. He's got all his stuff in place. So then he's got to ask, okay, is the money, is the access to recruits so much different in this era in college football to go to Florida, to go to LSU? I mean, Florida's been down for a long time right now. We hear a lot about how great a job Florida is and how you should win there. Well, if that was the case, why have they been so bad, right? It's not like, flipping the switch is going to necessarily change anything. So I don't know. I kind of like him to stay where he's at, but it's just all speculation, really. I mean, I think he would be more likely to be for LSU than for Florida, but that is just kind of me sitting here on the West Coast looking at what's going on in the South with just some educated guesses, not much real behind the scenes insight.
Kyle, good stuff, man. Appreciate the time. Enjoy the weekend, and we'll chat soon.
All right, I'm going to go listen to my Richard Marx record sounds. So I appreciate that.
There we go. Kyle Bonagura, a noted fan of Richard Marx. At Bonagura ESPN is where you find him. The question is, do we break our bit with Howard Beck and not play like hipster tunes for the hippest NBA writer around, or do we just continue with the Richard Marx, Rod Stewart situation?
What you're saying here is that Rod Stewart and Richard Marx are not hip.
I'm very much saying that. Yes, I am.
Noted.
Okay. Well, we are going to switch gears. The Jazz are in action tonight. Quinn Snyder's in town with the Atlanta Hawks. So we'll talk some pro basketball with Howard coming up on the other side. We'll preview, I guess, Thursday Night Football because the Jets are playing. Sam Bruckhouse will join us. We'll get some college football thoughts on Sam as well. So busy Thursday show. Beautiful day outside. And it's good to have you along for the ride right here on ESPN 700. I was conflicted because our next guest certainly is not going to be on board with our Rod Stewart selection today. We're giving away tickets to the Rod Stewart and Richard Marx concert coming up because we like to take care of our 58-year-old single women on Tinder or dating apps. Howard Beck, I'm sorry. I feel like I have failed you. My guess is Rod Stewart is not one that you find on the Howard Beck playlist very often.
Spence, how are you, man? It's been too long. I did, as I heard the music coming in, I was like, well, that's an unusual choice. That's not our usual vibe. But it's a new season. It's a weird season. There's like cap circumvention scandals and gambling scandals and, GM firings 3 weeks into the season. So why not go with some Rod Stewart? Why not?
It will be a one-off, I can promise you, sir. But it's great to hear your voice. It has been too long. Just give me an update, man. How you doing? What have you been up to start the year?
Things are good, thank you. Nothing dramatically new here. It was a nice off season. Spent a week in Hawaii on the Big Island in August. That was great. Wish I was still there, especially as I walk through Brooklyn right now, where it is, low 50s, maybe high 40s. It's cold. I'd rather be in Hawaii, but season's good so far.
Well, and as you referenced, the season's good so far, but it is weird. And I do want to talk to you about the Nico stuff, the Nico Harrison stuff. We had you on last year, the week that trade went down, and it was a horrible decision then. It certainly has not aged well to this day, and it did feel like the clock was ticking after he decided to trade Luka to the Lakers. And the other thing that kind of sucks is he reset the Lakers time frame. Like, they have a cornerstone and a generational piece. Once LeBron decides to walk, they're going to be fine as long as they surround Luka with talent. But how did you digest this storyline, and what do you make of the Mavs moving on from Nico Harrison?
I think it was necessary. Unfortunately, I don't like taking victory laps when people get fired, and we all panned the trade, and so it's hard to say anything other than this was the only logical conclusion to this. Like, it had to happen eventually. Now, you could make a case that, the owner, Patrick Dumont, new owner, for whatever reason signed off on this, didn't know better. And so once you've done that, nothing has changed fundamentally for your team other than they're very banged up and not very good. And I think there's actually some critique to be made, too, of Nico's offseason. Like, I don't think they did a good job even in trying to rebuild the roster a little bit after this trade. But you can make the case that it doesn't make sense to fire him now if you wanted to, based on the idea that you already as a team bought into this, as ownership bought into this. And the reason they're struggling right now, primarily, other than not having Luka, is that they are relying on a rookie in Cooper Flag to run point for most of the season so far, not so much recently. And you've been really banged up. Anthony Davis isn't playing, and Kyrie Irving's not playing, and Derek Lively's not playing. They're really banged up. But that's being too cute. Making that case is almost a little too cute. I've heard people make the argument that the timing of the firing doesn't make sense. If you were going to fire him for the Luka trade, you should have fired him last season or not even signed off on the Luka trade. But I'm just going to say that as a new owner, Patrick Dumont clearly didn't know what he was signing off on, and has come to terms over the course of many painful months with the fact that this was a terrible trade as a basketball matter, and an even worse trade in some ways as a marketing and PR matter. And the fans were in absolute revolt. And there's only so much you can endure with the fire Nico chance. Jason Kidd said it the other night. It was affecting his team. They didn't have a home court advantage. They felt like they had a home court disadvantage. The vibes were just terrible. So this was the only logical conclusion. It was going to happen at some point. And, now they just got to clean up the mess. And I think that the most logical way forward, once you figure out who your front office is you probably should be a teardown, because they have their lottery pick. It's the last year that they have control of their draft pick for a while. It's a great draft class coming up. Just pull the plug. See if you can find a new home for Anthony Davis. That won't be easy. He has a massive contract, and he's always hurt, and he's almost 33. But, you got this great gift from the lottery gods to get Cooper Flag. You're on his timeline now. Kyrie Irving Anthony Davis, these guys are of no use to you. You got to reset.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And it's interesting, and I will admit a bias here. I try not to bring that into my profession, but during my 7 years with the Utah Jazz, the main basketball decision maker and roster constructor was Dennis Lindsey, who has joined Trajan Langdon in Detroit and built up what looks to be a very good team now, and a team that's in a good spot to compete for quite some time. And according to multiple reports, Mark Cuban himself, who's no longer, of course, the majority owner down there, as we've discussed, is hoping that Dumont looks at Dennis for that general manager job. He is a Texas native and great family, great wife, great kids. And I hope this happens for Dennis, who unfortunately, after the ownership transition, elected to not work for the new ownership group here and went to Dallas for a minute, then landed at Detroit, as I talked about. But what do you make of this potential possibility, Dennis Lindsey running the Mavs now?
They certainly need, I think, a steady, seasoned hand, and Dennis fits the bill there. I think David Griffin could be another good choice, who's, obviously he was fired by the Pelicans in the offseason. I think Griff got a raw deal in New Orleans based just on them always being hurt, and they tied their fate to Zion, which any team would have. David Griffin obviously, was there for the championship in Cleveland and all those finals runs. He'd be another good one. Dennis Lindsey would be great. But they gotta stabilize. And I think I always say it's the hardest thing for an owner, especially a new owner in the NBA, is that they don't know anything about basketball. Some of them delude themselves into thinking they do. Matt Ishbia comes to mind, but none of them really know. And so they've got to pick somebody who they know and trust and can really rely on, and is worth that trust, worthy of that trust. So a guy like Dennis Lindsey or David Griffin, maybe a couple others like that would make the most sense to me, because they've got some really big decisions they've got to make. Are you pivoting to just build around Cooper Flagg? Are you going to try to trade Anthony Davis? How are you going to manage your way out of this? How are you going to, restore faith from your fan base? There's a lot riding on that. And right now they've got interim GMs with co-GMs of Michael Finley, former longtime player, of course, and Matt Riccardi, who I know well because he came from the Nets front office here in Brooklyn. Capable guys, and, maybe they go with one of them. But, I think it makes a lot of sense to get somebody who has done this before.
I would agree. I think Dennis would be a really, really good choice. Moving off this storyline, and before we actually get to, teams and games, I do have another kind of basketball on-court related story I wanted to talk to you about. I just wonder, and you might be one of these VIPs that has the League Pass VIP, I get to watch whatever I want, whenever I want to watch guy. I'm not that. What do you make of the way that Amazon and NBC and, the newly rebranded ESPN, the three different broadcast partners, early returns on how the consumer is asked to kind of adjust things to watch basketball this year? How do you think it's gone so far?
I'd be curious to know, they keep sending out, as they often do, that ratings have been great. That's nice. I'm glad to hear it. I'd be curious how the average fan is navigating all this. I don't know. I don't have that VIP package either. I have a combination of my DirecTV League Pass, but I also have the Amazon Prime, and I have Peacock and all that. And yeah, there are nights there where, as somebody who covers the league, I need to bounce around sometimes. And that's real easy if I'm just bouncing around the League Pass channels. But suddenly I'll be like, oh, wait, I really wanted to see that Lakers game. Where is it? Oh, no, it's on Prime. Now I got to switch over. And then you can't switch back that easily. You can't, we're all conditioned now to have this incredible convenience of just clicking between channels. And it is more complicated now to go from broadcast and cable to streaming and then the other streaming. Of course, the streamers are not on the same night. But and then I had the other night, I was trying to get to the Peacock game, and Peacock glitched on me, and I couldn't even pull it up at all. So if I'm having some frustration with it, certainly the average fan is.
Yeah, and I can echo that. I know that there's a way that I can watch the inside guys the way that I used to, but maybe it's just my routine and missing them on TNT. And then you pull it up, and it is the same cast, but it feels different. They're sponsored by Popeyes. It's just a weird thing. I have not watched Inside more than a handful of times this year, and I got to admit, I miss it.
Yeah, I haven't really either. My routine is completely thrown off by this. I have not gotten used to the new setup yet with all these, with this array of carriers.
So, quick Jazz thought, and look, unfortunately, we will be covering the Utah Jazz the same way we did last year, which is simply this. They have a top 8 protected pick that goes to Oklahoma City if they're not among the bottom 8 teams in the NBA. And so for a team that is still very much, and sadly, even though it's year 4 of a rebuild, they're very, very early on if we're actually looking at any sort of tangible progress. We know that Lowry's awesome. Walker Kessler is out for the year with shoulder surgery. Ace Bailey has shown some flashes. He's still very young. He's finally in the starting lineup. He had 20 the other night. But just big picture, what do you think we're going to see from the Jazz? Does it feel like it's going to be the same thing as it was last year in order to hold on to an asset that I believe they cannot let out of their grasp?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear what they need to do, right? Like holding on to that pick with the top 8 protection, what a heartbreak it would be for the franchise and its fans, especially during this period of time where things have been pretty challenging the last couple of years, to lose the pick at number 9 or something when you're that close to it. And it's a really good draft. Like, I'm not a draft guy, as you know, but Jay Kyle Mann, who I work with at The Ringer, and all the other, draft experts are really enthused about this draft class. Obviously, the top 3 guys primarily, but overall, great draft. Kyle actually even said he thought the 2026 draft could be even better than 2025, and 2025 is shaping up to have been a pretty damn good class so far. So I don't think you can afford, I hate to say it, you can't afford to make this too competitive of a season. You got to lean into being a bottom 8 team and keeping your pick. They lost Walker Kessler, which is terrible, but I think it helps clarify the agenda, which is don't win too much. And you and I have been on the same page with the Markkanen question this whole time. I got some pushback recently on Blue Sky from a couple of people, and a couple of them wrote, I thought, very compelling, impassioned cases for keeping Lauri Markkanen. I'm ultimately not persuaded, though. I still think the right thing to do for him and for the franchise is to move him now, because by the time you're good again, he's going to be, moving into his late prime or out of his prime, and it just doesn't make sense. So I know he says he's happy there and all that stuff, and they've got too much work to do. And, even if you see, Ace Bailey starting to pop, and Keontae George has some nice moments and is looking better this season, like, you're just not close enough. It's going to be a while. And, as we say, you're better off losing anyway, and Lauri Markkanen makes it harder to lose.
Yeah, for sure. But let me follow up about Markkanen, because, my assertion, as you just outlined, is when he made the All-Star team was the time to jump, because his value was at an all-time high. And you elected to sit him intentionally last year to the tune of a $100,000 fine from the league. So I don't know that his value now was what it was almost 3 years ago when he was younger and an all-star. So it does feel like you waited too long. But I agree with you. If you're going to do it, you got to do it now. What sort of value? Like, if Austin Ainge is making phone calls about Markkanen, what sort of value do you think he has around the NBA?
I think his value is still really high. Obviously it hasn't been the greatest stretch for him the last couple of years, and a lot of that has to do with the surrounding cast and just circumstance, but he's still a really valuable, really talented player. There are any number of teams in the league that would chase him if they decided tomorrow to make that move. I can't tell you exactly what they're going to get, but I think it would be a really healthy package. They will get more for Lauri Markkanen than what the Mavericks can get for Anthony Davis right now. I'll tell you that. Yeah,
I would tend to agree with that. All right, let's just kick the tires on both conferences real quick when it comes to where we find ourselves. And obviously, it's a small sample size. Most NBA people will tell you at least Thanksgiving, if not Christmas, till we sort of know what hand we've been dealt. Donovan's been awesome. The Cavs are right there at the top. I don't know what the Jalen Brunson news is after leaving the Garden on crutches last night. And we already talked about the Pistons, who are 10-2. But what are your thoughts early on Eastern Conference, and do you feel like there's a couple of favorites that have been established just yet?
So last I saw, Brunson apparently is going to miss at least a game. They're not saying much beyond that, but that would be a tough one if they're losing him for any length of time. The East is weird right now. Cleveland and New York are still on paper the best teams, I think, but man, Detroit's making a really strong case to put themselves in that same category. It's hard because they don't have as much of a track record, right? Like the Pistons are still super young. Last year was their first playoff appearance. They played well enough to beat the Knicks, and there was a bad call at the end of one of those games that if it had gone the other way, who knows? The Pistons are super impressive. Cade's made another leap, and Duran's made another leap, and they're just they still they're I think top of the standings right now without even having had Jaden Ivey for a single game yet, and he'll come back in the next couple of weeks, I think. So maybe it's a 3-team race, and then the Bucks have looked really good. Giannis has been his usual dominant self, and maybe even ratcheted it up another level. And you've got this great Ryan Rollins story, his breakthrough. I don't buy the Bucks as a contender, but you can never just rule out Giannis because he's probably the best player in the Eastern Conference. And then you get down to like the Sixers and the Magic and the Hawks, and it's kind of a mishmash. It is early still, as you noted. I think by the time we get to the spring, it's probably still New York and Cleveland and maybe Detroit.
The Hawks are in town tonight, and, as I referenced earlier with my 7 years at the Jazz with Dennis Lindsay as the roster constructor, Quinn Snyder was the coach. And, I feel like, Howard, at one point, he was considered as one of the best coaches in the league, and there were a lot of rumors that when Pop was done, Quinn would get that job, and ultimately he lands in Atlanta, and his tenure has just kind of been up and down. They make a lot of offseason additions. Porzingis, they bring in Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who – interestingly enough, Quinn had here and didn't play him, and now he's playing him a lot. Nikhil's playing very well. They feel like one of those teams just kind of lingering in a little bit in the mix, which is kind of on brand for the Hawks. But what's the current sentiment about Quinn across the landscape of the NBA?
Well, in his defense on the Nickeil Alexander-Walker thing, like 3 or 4 teams passed him around before he really broke out in Minnesota. Sometimes guys just develop on a longer timeline. So, listen, I don't think people think any less of Quinn Snyder now than they did when he was in Utah and was regarded as one of the brighter coaches in the league. The Hawks are a tough situation. And, this is in a lot of cases, it's really about, the personnel. And also if you have a franchise star, the nature of that franchise star. Trae Young is a very difficult star to build around. All-star talent, clearly, been an all-star a couple of times, but hard to build a winner around because of all of his defensive deficiencies. He's been difficult for guys to play with. We've heard those murmurings throughout his career that he can be just, tough. Not that teammates think he's a bad guy or bad to play with, but just, he's going to dominate the offense a bit, and there's going to, be a little bit of an up and down with his efficiency. But great passer, great shooter, small, hard to build around, hard to build a winner around. That's why he doesn't have an extension right now and is heading toward potential free agency next summer. And, why you're going to hear increasingly between now and the trade deadline speculation about whether they might trade him before the trade deadline. And there's been, everybody around the league is talking about this period where he's out injured as being a bit of a referendum, in that if they win a lot without him, it may just encourage them that much more to move on him, move off of him. And if they start losing without him, maybe they think, oh, you know what, maybe we need him after all, and let's reconsider, and we'll hold on to him and figure out how to do an extension next summer. But I think, that's not a Quinn Snyder answer. You were asking about Quinn, but I think it kind of is indirectly, because I do think that the difficulty there has always been, how do you build around him and build a consistent winner?
Yeah, no, well said. Let's move out this way, where high-level basketball is being played really every single night with some elite basketball teams. I mean, look, OKC learned how to do it last year. They broke through. They're the defending champs. And when I watch them, they look like a finely tuned machine with high-level talent, great coaching, incredible depth. I mean, oftentimes I'll be watching, I'm like, wait, who is that? Who just had 20? Okay, I guess I need to Google him. Nikola Jokic is reminding everybody, wait a second, I'm still that guy, potentially the best player in the league. Wembanyama is terrifying. The Rockets' early returns are good, and the Lakers are still the Lakers. I didn't even mention the Timberwolves or the Warriors. I mean, we've got a lot of good basketball teams out this way, Howard. How do you think the West is shaping up?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of going the way we all figured, which is that Oklahoma is still awesome and in a tier of their own. The second tier is some combination of Denver and Houston. I'm still a little skeptical of the Rockets for the spring, but as of right now, they're right in the mix there. And then it's everybody else, right? It's the Lakers have a claim to stake, and the Warriors, Timberwolves. Obviously, the Warriors have gone through a little bit of a rough patch recently. I thought the Clippers were going to be in this conversation as that second or third tier, but they've absolutely fallen apart. Fun little side note, not so fun if you're these teams, but if the lottery were held today or the draft were held today, the Clippers pick is going to the Thunder, as would the Jazz's at number 9.
Mm-hmm.
And here the Thunder, I mean, we've all talked about the Thunder have all this talent, all this depth, and all these draft picks, but all those picks include the possibility of 2 lottery picks in 2026. I don't think it'll go that way. Probably the Jazz will tank their way into keeping their pick. But my gosh, if the Clippers don't get out of this tailspin, talk about insult to injury for them. It's just brutal. But yeah, like the West is super competitive, but the Thunder are just, I don't want to say they're miles beyond everybody else, but it's like Jalen Williams hasn't even played yet. Their second best player has not played a single minute yet. And they're just running laps around everybody.
Yeah, they are. If I forced you to cash in the Howard Beck 401k and invest in the future of either the Thunder or the Spurs, who would you choose and why?
The future of the Thunder or the Spurs?
Yeah.
Oof, how many years out is the future?
we'll say it's a 10-year return. You get your ROI in 10 years.
Ooh, man, that's tough. It's still the Thunder. I mean, Wemby is amazing, and Stephon Castle and Dylan Harper was playing really well until he got hurt. And they've got De'Aaron Fox, and they've got all their picks, and I think they still have a surplus of picks. And they're a smart team, even with Pop having moved on from the bench. Like, it's just a really great franchise. I trust the Spurs to do all the right things around Wemby for the foreseeable future. But the Thunder have such a head start. And Shea's in his prime, and Jalen Williams has not even reached his prime, nor has Chet Holmgren, and they've got all this talent and all these picks. Like, if you're doing whatever the window is, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, I cannot bet against the Thunder.
Before I set you loose, last thing, I'll let you go with this. At one point, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, I felt like Memphis was going to be this team that other teams in the West had to watch out for, because I felt like Ja was one of those cornerstones. He wasn't just fun to watch. He was that, but also evolving into potentially one of the faces of the league. And the drop has been stark and stunning over the past few years, mostly because of the off-court stuff. At what point does Memphis decide to do what you said Dallas probably will do, just to go all in and break this thing down? And are there takers for Ja Morant around the league now?
I wondered about the Grizzlies when they traded Desmond Bane, because that was a take a step back, 2 steps back to move a step forward later, or 1 step back to make 2 steps. I don't know how many steps. But the Desmond Bane thing was definitely a step backward, right? Like you flipped one of your best players for a ton of draft picks and to kind of ease your cap situation and everything else. And I don't know, what the timeline will be there, but I thought it might indicate that they were going to take even further steps in the other direction. That's not the case, at least so far, but now we have these flare-ups between Ja Morant and the coach, and I've heard that, there's murmurings that, maybe Jaren Jackson Jr. is not all that thrilled either with the way things are going. The coach is difficult. He's a tough personality, and especially for, today's NBA player, and the things that Thomas Isolo did in Europe don't work necessarily as well here, so we'll see how that continues. But Ja's not the same player he was. Like he's slight framed, relies a ton on his athleticism, and plays a really bruising style in which he is getting knocked to the floor all the time because he's driving into the paint, and it's admirable. It's really reminiscent of Allen Iverson back in the day, who was even smaller. But you take a lot of punishment playing that way. It's exciting, it's fun, but it can shorten your career. He doesn't look like the same player either physically or his just demeanor on the court. So I don't know if he ends up getting traded. I kind of feel like it's going to be hard for them to reverse this. And like, if he's not happy, as he has indicated, what's going to make him happy again there? And if he's not, if you can't fix that, I feel like you have to move off of him. But I don't think his value is real high. There's not going to be a ton of demand for him.
Howard, thanks for the time. It's always fun to catch up. I'll let you go listen to some Rod Stewart B-sides, okay?
I'm all over it. Thanks, Spence. Talk soon.
Great Howard Beck from The Ringer. As I say every time he stops by, he's been one of my favorite NBA writers for 2 decades, and I love catching up with him, man. A lot of good insight there. Appreciate Howard's time. All right, we will catch a break here, and we'll get the 4 o'clock hour started. Thursday Night Football tonight features one serious team and then the New York Jets. Sam Bruckhouse stops by. We'll do a little college with Sam as well. Our friends from Sports Court roll by. 5 o'clock hour, we'll get back to the college football. This big storyline today is Mark Harlan has been unanimously approved as a new member of the College Football Playoff Committee. We'll discuss that later on a Thursday Drive right here on ESPN 700. Wait, I actually know this one. I know 2 Rod Stewart songs. Is this called Forever Young?
There you go.
All right. Okay. I still only know the one Richard Marx song, though. What was that one called? Wherever You Go or whatever? Something like that.
Sure.
We're giving away tickets to the Rod Stewart Richard Marx concert. So we are celebrating single 58-year-old women who are on Hinge swiping who need a date. That's why we're playing these bumpers. Thursday Night Football. Amazon Prime features one serious franchise in the New York Jets. Our next guest joins us on a weekly basis to talk football. Hello, Sam Brockhouse. How are you, buddy?
I'm good, man. You only know 2 Rod Stewart songs?
Oh, wait a second. Do we have a Rod Stewart fan? We've been looking for one all day. Are you a big Rod Stewart fan?
I wouldn't describe myself as like the biggest fan on earth, but you got Maggie May, you got Do You Think I'm Sexy, you got Young Turks,
Wow.
you got that one you just played. I mean, he got some bangers. 2 seems a little small. I would have set the line at least 4.5 for you, Spence.
Bangers for real? I mean, are those bangers, Sam? I mean, are they really?
I mean, like, Do You Think I'm Sexy starts out that with the chicka-chow.
Okay.
Like, I mean, they are certified play in the car on a 2.5-hour drive in my car any day.
I like the enthusiasm. Should I have any enthusiasm for my Jets' chances at Gillette tonight?
The vibes are certainly starting to look better. I told you they were coming, Spence. I told you they were coming. They're starting to look good. They pulled off a victory last week. If you were to just sit me in front of the numbers and tell me what it looks like, I'd say that they really only have one good spot, which is that if they are able to limit the success rate of the Patriots offense, which typically has not played super well at running the ball extremely well, then I would say that game script perhaps leads to the Jets being competitive. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be the case. Right now, the Patriots are 4th in expected points added per pass. We have Drake May on the 2nd team of our Sumer Sports All-Pro list, which you can go check out on YouTube. Sumer Sports Show. Check that out with Lindsey Rhodes. So I think if you just had to really put me to it, the Patriots are probably going to be able to get it done through the air today. But there is a shot that the Jets are able to slow the game down almost like an Army or a Navy would do and drag the Patriots down, force them to run the ball, and they've struggled with that all year. I think that's the game script that probably makes your Jets look good.
What lessons can we learn from the way the Patriots have been able to get this done so quickly? I mean, 7 straight wins, and we combine that with the Bills being uncharacteristically inconsistent, and right now they're atop the division. Is this as simple as finding the right coach and the quarterback, or does it go beyond that?
I think if you want a team-building takeaway, it's that you got to build through the trenches. Now, do remember that last year, Christian Barmore, their starting defensive tackle, who was a star in the Belichick system, did miss most of the year. So you got to, attribute some of that. I mean, he's not quite Aaron Donald, and he's not quite Chris Jones, but if Aaron Donald or Chris Jones were to miss an entire year, the defense would probably not look great either. So anyway, Barmore comes back. They add Robert Spillane at the linebacking position, who we also had on our all-pro list, and he starts to look good. But on the offensive side, they add Morgan Moses. It allows Mike Onwenu to move back to his natural guard position. And then Will Campbell comes in at the left tackle position. All of a sudden, it starts looking good because they're playing at about a league average to above level.
Back to the Jets just for a minute, because I want to kick the tire. Look, they can't even tank right. They should be doing that, but they go get a win last week. But, of course, the plan seems to be to grab one of these quarterbacks in the upcoming draft class. If the Jets have their pick of the litter, is there one that stands out? I mean, we've got to see who comes out, obviously. But of the most likely quarterbacks available in next year's draft, is there one that stands out to you?
Yeah, I'm going to push back on that. They're not tanking correctly. You can't forget they have like two to 4 first-round picks in the next 2 years as a result of those trades. So they can kind of maneuver wherever they want in order to get who they want. That being said, at the top of the draft this year, in the top 5 of the consensus big board, is Fernando Mendoza from Indiana. You got Ty Simpson, the first-year starter, but a long-time Alabama quarterback. And then you got Dante Moore, who transferred to Oregon. I am of the belief that Arch Manning and Lenore Sellers, 2 very highly touted quarterbacks before the season, will probably be back in school. It's more likely that Arch will come back than Sellers will. But I really like what I've seen from Mendoza. And if I'm Tanner Engstrand, the offensive coordinator of the Jets, and I had years as the quarterback coach of Jared Goff, I take a look at Mendoza, 6'5", 225 pounds, a precision passer, a person who can operate in a timing-based system, who can play under center as well. And I think Mendoza is probably the selection should the Jets want to get their guy at the top of round one.
One more question in this division in the AFC East. What's going on with the Bills? I mean, I know we talked about this earlier, but it was an ass kicking against the Dolphins, and McDaniel's fighting to keep his job. We've already discussed this, and maybe this is just what they do in the middle of the season. They figure it out come playoff time, and they do have who a lot of people believe is the best player in the league in Josh Allen. But can you identify maybe why the inconsistencies appear to be so apparent with them?
Yeah, I think they have kind of began to rely on the run too much. That being said, in expected points added per rush, they are second in the league, so that's not an actual killer. And mind you, at the Buffalo Bills are top 10 in EPA per pass as well. So the offense is looking good in the aggregate. But I think that they're starting to lean a little bit too much on the run game, which we've seen, in the middle of the year from good teams before. I want to see if they can really open it up as it starts to get cold and teams start to clam up. When they come up there to Buffalo, if they can start to unleash Josh Allen a little bit more. In particular, though, I think the problem is the same problem that they have always had on the flip side of the ball. It is that defense. They like to go out and play that nickel and dime light box defense. And in this year, at least, it's worked pretty well. But Mike McDaniel is absolute genius when it comes to run concepts. That's the reason why he seems to be keeping his job, and that's the reason why I think if they're going to be a highly drafting team, it's going to be really hard for the Miami Dolphins to fire Mike McDaniel just because he is so good at putting people in positions to win on offense. They have Devon Achane come up against him. The schemes are right. They absolutely slaughter those light boxes last week. I'd like to see if any adjustments are made. I wouldn't expect anything too drastic to be had. But as usual, we are sitting here in the middle to late portion of the season talking about if the Buffalo Bills can hold up on defense. The Ravens are starting to look better. The Chiefs are back to their former glory in terms of offense, at least for most of the year. It's starting to look a little tenuous for that defense. They've been able to overcome it in past years and make it all the way to the championship game. I'll be interested to see if they can do that again now that there's some new challengers, the New England Patriots, who we just talked about, the Indianapolis Colts as well. It's going to be interesting to see if that defense can hold up.
Just reference the Ravens, so let's stay in the AFC, but move to the AFC North. The Steelers-Chargers game was really hard to watch, and that was as bad as Aaron has ever been. But, what do you expect from a quarterback who's aging like that? And the Chargers are a solid defensive team, well-coached. The Ravens are creeping, man. Lamar's back. Looks like he's going to play coming up this week after being back at practice today. So I do want your thoughts on the Ravens, but I did want to kick the tires with you on this story that Joe Burrow has a practice window that's now open, and whether or not it even makes sense for the Bengals to do this is they've lost 5 of 6, and they're technically still alive, of course, because there's plenty of football left. But their schedule moving forward, they're at Pittsburgh. They get the Patriots at home. They're at Baltimore. They're at Buffalo. Then they get the Ravens at home. Like, their next 5 games are tough. Does it make any sense to bring Joe Burrow back when you're risking potentially another injury for a season that might be lost?
I think it's always tough to say that it's not worth it for a franchise player to come back just as an ex-player because you want to keep those guys competitive. And we've seen teams completely fall apart as a result of trying to hold guys out. The Browns come to mind, the way that they kind of manage their players from time to time. So I think it's going to be really hard if Burrow wants to come back to hold him out. That being said, it doesn't look super bright for them. That offense has performed at a high level at times with Joe Flacco in the game, and it really hasn't made a huge difference, notably against your Jets. So if I were there and did not have any, team chemistry things to care about, I'd probably keep him out, try to keep him healthy for next year. But the division is open, and as a result, I think the Ravens are probably going to jump up and take it. The numbers are starting to look good, not only with Lamar in the game, but in the aggregate as well. Explosive play rate, second in the league right now. They're starting to creep in to become one of the better offenses in the league, and what do you know? Just as we talked about last year, their defense is all of a sudden starting to look a little bit better, creeping up from the depths of the league in terms of success rate and in expected points added to be more of a league average team. This is always the way that the Ravens like to be. They like to peak late. Obviously, they did not want to lose Lamar Jackson in the middle of the season, but now that he's back, they're starting to look a little bit more competitive. And if I had to really put my money on the table right now, I believe substantially more in the Ravens than I do in the Steelers right now.
Had Lindsay on this week, and we kicked the tires with you a couple of weeks ago, if not last week, about the Colts, and now everybody seems to be waiting for Daniel Jones to look like the Daniel Jones he did in New York, even though when the Giants protected him, he actually looked pretty good. But with Jonathan like watching that game last week, the Falcons game, with Jonathan Taylor running the ball the way he is, I don't know that Daniel Jones has to be amazing for them to keep this up. They're 8-2. When is it time for us to say, like, yeah, it's real in Indianapolis?
I think at this point, as it pertains to the 2025 season, it's real. They're going to be able to move people up front. We got two guys on our Sumer Sportsman. He's an all-pro team that made that. Bernard Raymond, the left tackle, and Quinn Nelson, the left guard. That line is going to be able to protect. They're going to be able to move people. I think that is the way that they're going to play. The question is, when does the Sam Darnoldification, as it happened with the Vikings last year, start to come into play? And I think once you start facing the Chiefs with Chris Jones, who's going to force interior pressure, once you start facing the Broncos, who are absolutely on fire and can bring pressure basically at will, say with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 guys, doesn't matter. It's coming from somewhere. I think that is when the windows will start to tighten up for Daniel Jones in particular. And they're going to have to rely on the passing game in the playoffs when you are facing guys like Patrick Mahomes, when you're facing Josh Allen, when you're facing the ascendant Drake May. You're not going to be able to do it just on the ground. And we've seen that from the Philadelphia Eagles in the last couple of playoffs, where all of a sudden their passing game starts to look good in the playoffs, and they're able to overcome some of those harsher defenses as a result. It's just a matter at this point of if they can hit those tight windows when the pressure starts getting high. I think that's my worry with Daniel Jones. Whenever you're unable to run because you're facing the best defenses in the league, can they still do it? I still don't know if that's the case, but at least as it pertains to the 2025 regular season, they are for real. They're one of the better teams in the league.
Before we get to the NFC, we'll finish with the AFC West, where Bronco fans in our market, as a result of proximity, very excited about 7 straight wins. That was an eyesore against the Raiders. The Raiders are the only unserious team in that division, though. Broncos, Chargers, and then obviously Kansas City, of course, continues to be right there, and Vegas continues to like them to not just get that division, but potentially get the whole thing again. How do you think this division plays out when the dust settles?
I think when you look at the most complete team, it is definitely the Kansas City Chiefs. When you look at the team who has the players that are playing the best outside of the quarterback position, it is the Denver Broncos. You think of Garrett Bowles, Quinn Miners, Talanoa Hufanga, Nick Benito, some of these cornerbacks. I mean, they're playing out of their mind right now, and that's why they're able to win games solely with one side of the ball, depending on what the game is happening. The question still, as it has been for the past 2 years, can Bo Nix get it together? He's unable to get it together or get really anything going against the Raiders defense, a Raiders team who has been struggling mightily, but the defense was able to pull through. The Chargers just continue to win. The reason why is Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert and that wide receiver group are working at an extremely high level right now. The question is can they hold on to the reins given their offensive line is struggling so much, especially if the defensive injury bug starts to hit. And then I think you look at the Raiders team, they're just kind of depleted right now. Geno Smith looked extremely banged up on the field on last Thursday night. I think it's time for them to turn the page to next season.
All right, let's get to the NFC now. And we talked to Lindsay about this week. This week. Like the Eagles conversation continues to be really fascinating to me because they're winning. They just are. And, Nick Sirianni, grumpy with the media this week, has asked about the A.J. Brown stuff. He's not happy. 7-2, though. So what's fair to say about the criticism when it comes to the Eagles? And do we just give them credit for simply being 7-2?
Well, look, last week we discussed how even though the offense is typically the topic of discussion, sneakily the defense has not been performing, at least to their top of the league standard. That changed against the Packers. You bring in Jalen Phillips. He causes all types of chaos, lives up to his Pro Bowl level Sumer score that we had for him while he was in a Dolphins jersey. All of a sudden that defense looks like the home wrecker that it was last year. And I think in future weeks, we're going to see them move up from their expected points added per play ranking of 11 right now, back up into the top 5 or 6 as the season continues to move along. I don't think the defense is a problem at all anymore. We had Cooper DeJean as a Super Sports midseason All-Pro as well. I think they got the pieces where they need to be, and I think some of these trades are going to make a huge difference down the line. But the offense just can't get it together, man. And they legitimately could not do anything against the Packers defense. Now, Packers defense is one of the better ones in the league, and you look at some of the numbers, they are operating at about a league average level typically in some of the advanced metrics that we like to see. It is just inconsistent. 20th in success rate out of 32 teams in the league. You'd love to see that move up a little bit, and I think it's going to have to be behind the backs of that offensive line. In recent weeks, they've been doing a lot more stuff with 6 offensive linemen, bringing in Fred Johnson. I think that has kind of been figured out as of last week against the Packers. What is their next move, and at what point can they get those wide receivers going? Kind of got Devontae Smith going last week. He's having an impact starter level season according to our Sumer scores. Can you get A.J. Brown on the horse? Can you get Dallas Goedert on the horse? Can you spring Saquon loose for a couple more explosive plays? That's the question right now for the Philadelphia Eagles offense. They have been unable to do it all season, but there's no better time than now. We've seen them peak at the right time. Last season, we saw them peak at the right time when they made a Super Bowl years ago. I think we're really going to learn who this offense is in the next couple of weeks.
I want to go back to a player you referenced when we were talking Denver, because Garrett Bowles is a Ute and he's a friend of the show. And you guys had some very high praise for Garrett Bowles on Sumer Sports with your all midseason team. What has made this season as dominant for Garrett Bowles as it has been?
Garrett Bowles has been the most consistent offensive lineman in the National Football League this year. If I had a vote right now, I'd vote for him for Protector of the Year, the new award that I'm really excited about is coming out, giving some kudos to those guys working hard up front who typically don't win awards. But he has been immensely consistent. We talk about Trent Williams and Penei Sewell and even Miners on his own team as being used as weapons and being moved over to the outside and pulled around and basically being used as a skill player or a chess piece to spring skill players loose on the outside. It's not necessarily what Garrett Bowles is doing. He's being used more in that Lane Johnson from the Eagles vein where you put him on an island and he produces. You set it and forget it. That's what Garrett Bowles has done this season. He really hasn't had a substandard performance the entirety of the year. He has several really impactful games as well, according to our Sumer scores, and that's why he's one of the best and one of the most consistent offensive linemen in the league this year.
All right. Let's see. Let's go to the NFC North. A lot of conversation about the Caleb Williams progress. Are you seeing that as the Bears are 6-3? Is it real?
Yeah, I think the real kind of story with Caleb is that he's refound the ability to avoid sacks. We do a lot of tracking data to try to figure out how fast these guys are. And one of our favorite ways to contextualize it is to use their tracking data to predict what their 40 might be if they ran it, healthy at the end of the season. Right now, our prediction of his 40-yard dash is of the highest of any quarterbacks based on his 2025 tracking data thus far. He has been able to be elusive in a way that he was not last year. He's avoiding sacks, limiting those negative plays, and that's exactly what Ben Johnson wants. Sneakily, they have snuck into the top 9 of expected points added per play. Ben Johnson is doing some magnificent things. The wide receivers are constantly open in Chicago. The offensive line is playing well. We have Drew Dahlman, the center, and Joe Thuney, the Hall of Fame guard, on our Sumer Sports midseason all-pro list. And I think it's just up to Caleb to complete a little bit more of those passes, and they'll be a true contender on the offensive side of the ball.
All right. Let's go to the NFC West. Matt Stafford, your favorite in Vegas, I believe, to start the week he was to win MVP. But I want to ask you: are you buying the Rams or the Seahawks more?
I think I'm buying the Rams more, and wildly, I don't think it has anything to do with my favorite wide receiver in the league, Puka Nacua, or Matt Stafford. It has to do with that defense. Here's the matchup for real against the Seahawks. The Seahawks do two things. They run the ball an absolute ton, even though they are pretty bad at it. They're one of the worst rushing teams in the league, despite running it at a rate over expectation that is extremely high. So that is what they do. But then they bring in all these tight ends, and they try to bait defenses into biting on the run so that they can open up deep with Torrey Horton, now Rashid Shaheed, and notably the best wide receiver, and I think undervalued in terms of the Offensive Player of the Year odds, is Jackson Smith and Jigba. So I think the Rams just aren't going to buy it. What the Rams try to do to you is they will put 4 and 5 defensive linemen on the field and say, good luck running on them and good luck trying to keep them from getting pressure. Then Nate Landman, the linebacker, who has been pretty good in coverage, he'll be the only linebacker on the field, and they will flood the zones with safeties and cornerbacks. And those safeties and cornerbacks are playing at a high level. Cameron Curl, Quentin Lake, both made an appearance on our midseason All-Pro list. So on first and second down, keep an extremely close eye on how the Rams are matching personnel with the Seattle Seahawks. If they are just trotting out dime like they did in the second half against the San Francisco 49ers and not respecting the run, I think that Clint Kubiak will have to make a decision about how that he's going to continue to run this offense. Will he continue the trend that he had with the New Orleans Saints and with the Seattle Seahawks this year of just running it no matter what? Or will Sam Darnold be forced to drop back and make excellent passes, especially given they're going to be lining Jared Verse up over the center, and there will be interior pressure coming from Braden Fisk and from Kobe Turner. That is what he struggled with last year, particularly in that Lions game when he was on the Vikings, and that is going to be the challenge for him this week. So I think the Los Angeles Rams defense is what's going to carry them to a victory on Sunday.
Before I say you lose, some news with Brian Daboll losing his job, and I actually think he's a pretty decent coach. And we talked to Lindsay about this. He might just be one of those guys that's a coordinator. We'll see if he gets another opportunity. But it felt inevitable because results are results. But he also lost, his 3 young offensive stars with Jackson Dart leaving, of course, joining Malik Neighbors and Cam Scadaboo on the sideline. So what do you make of the decision, and how appealing is the Giants' job now?
Yeah, let's talk about the pros. I think Daboll was excellent at adjusting game plans week to week. You think of what that offense looked like at the beginning of the year with Russell Wilson, then all of a sudden they start running more 12 personnel. Theo Johnson becomes a target of interest, and Jackson Dart starts working well with Cam Scadaboo and Theo Johnson, some of the other wide receivers that were still on the depth chart without injury. And I think that was well done. I think he's shown that he has done that across Alabama, the Buffalo Bills, and the New York Giants. I think the struggle is just game management from the third and fourth quarters, and also injury management of Jackson Dart. I think that Giants took a step back and thought that he was risking Dart a little bit too much, and that's why we're now in a situation where he's been checked for, 2-3 concussions. One of them took him out this week. And I think that was a fear for the rest of the season, that Daboll with the Bunsen burner underneath him was going to risk Jackson Dart's future. That being said, I think this is a pretty straightforward job. You got a quarterback that at least is performing at league average level over the last couple of weeks, primarily because he's able to do it with his legs from time to time, which offense coordinators typically will take advantage of. You have Cam Scadaboo, who will be recovering from a pretty gnarly injury, but I think you could get a year or 2 of premium performance from him as well. If not, you got Tyrone Tracy still on a rookie contract right behind him, and you got Malik Neighbors. Those are 3 premium pieces. I think the key right now is ensuring that the left tackle stays healthy, getting other offensive linemen from free agency in on that interior offensive line, keeping that defensive front together, and then picking a cornerback or a safety that hits big on that backside. When there's only 1 to 2 positions that you really need to fill, interior offensive line and probably cornerback, it's probably a good job for a head coach. And I was kind of correct. I know I went on a little bit of rant of why the Dolphins should keep Mike McDaniel as they had, despite firing their general manager. I thought that Joe Shane had actually done a pretty good job of drafting. And of course, the notes and news and notes starts coming out that he has implemented a process and really brought the whole team together, at least on the front office side, organizationally from the Giants, so that they found it a little bit hard to get rid of him just because they feel as if their systems in place that Shane has put are working at a high level. I figured that was the case, and thus I think he's probably going to stay another year as a result.
Sam, where can people go find your work, and tell us about Sumer Brain and the midseason all-NFL teams?
Yeah, so go check us out on YouTube at Sumer Sports. That's SUMER Sports. Our midseason All-Pro list is up. You can go find all the detailed data about all of these top players in the league and why they deserve that on YouTube at Sumer Sports or wherever you listen to podcasts. And Sumer Brain, you know, somebody asked me when I've been talking about the Seahawks so much, and I want to see how much the Rams drop 8. The best place to get that data is Sumer Brain. I'll venture to say the only place to get that data is Sumer Brain. Go in there and ask how many players have a role of coverage and how that differs across teams in the league. Sumer Brain has excellent data, and it has proprietary data that you cannot get anywhere else. So go check that out. Sumersports.com/SumerBrain.
Good stuff, Sam. Thanks for the time. Enjoy the games, okay?
Thank y'all so much.
All right, Sam Bruckhouse, Sumer Sports. Man, fountain of information there. Appreciate Sam's time. Definitely support his work. And Lindsey Rhodes. That's Sam Bruckhouse. Lindsey Rhodes, his partner on his YouTube channel and the podcast. Excellent stuff there. So appreciate his time. Thursday Night Football, about 6:15 on Amazon Prime. The New York Jets taking on the New England Patriots. We will have that game for you on our radio station after we say goodnight at 6 o'clock. The Utah Jazz are in action tonight. They welcome in an old friend, as Quinn Snyder and the Atlanta Hawks are here in Salt Lake to play the Jazz at the Delta Center. So there you go. Some interesting news that affects our local soccer club. Major League Soccer is switching to a schedule to align with World Soccer. I believe what that means is if you are a season ticket holder to RSL, you better buy some warm clothes. I think they're playing games like in the dead of winter. Which is a really interesting thing for markets like ours. Millers may have to do something with America First Field. So that news came down a little bit earlier today. We'll get back to college football in the 5 o'clock hour. If you missed the breaking news, Mark Harlan is now a member of the College Football Playoff Committee, taking the spot of Mac Rhodes, who is on a leave of absence for personal reasons. We'll dissect that in the 5 o'clock hour. Do a little sports court, though, coming up on the other side with our friends from Handy and Handy on a Thursday show on ESPN 700. It is Sports Court time. We do it every Thursday right about now with our good friends over at Handy and Handy, and the band is back together. Garrett and Preston, happy Thursday. How we doing, guys?
The band is back together.
Great to have you both. Great to have you both. Just a heads up, internet acting up in the studio, so I have this via phone. I don't have access to the stories. I only have access to the headlines, so I'm just going to read the headlines, and you guys take it and run with it. Right out of the gates, it's the Brian Kelly LSU buyout battle. So unpack this for us. What's the latest?
Yes, Spence. I mean, we've talked. I mean, it's a big news this year. A lot of high-profile coaches at high-profile programs are getting the axe. Well, a month or so ago, Brian Kelly, whether you like it or not, it came out that he'd been terminated, and LSU issued a report and basically said, we've terminated Brian Kelly. We had high hopes of a lot of success here, and ultimately the success that we demand just simply did not materialize. And then Brian Kelly, he, according to what I think his contract said, he sent a note and said that he's confirming his termination and that he's going to comply with everything and return everything he needs to, and he's on his way. Well, he's not coaching LSU, right? Well, all the talk's been about this big buyout, $54 million. You know, it's the talk of all these coaches, frankly. But, well, it hit this week that LSU comes out with a statement that said, oh, you know what, we haven't really terminated him, and we are actually looking into fire him for cause. And we've talked about this a lot on different sports stories where coaches have been fired for cause, and every contract contains like a character or morality clause, basically says you need to comply with certain things, and if you don't, which impacts our university or our organization, that type of thing, we have the ability to fire you for cause. Well, LSU never said that at any point up until now. And I'm not even quite sure if they're even claiming he's been terminated right now. It's kind of strange, but they say they have grounds to fire him for cause. Well, Kelly, I think smartly, jumped ahead of the game, and he hired a lawyer, and he has sued LSU. He's not waiting around to see what they do. He sued them, claiming primarily that they have breached his contract, saying, hey, you terminated me. Part of his contract was that when I'm terminated, whatever remaining buyout is, you owe me. And he's also seeking a declaratory judgment from the court saying, hey, this is what happened. He was terminated. There's a contract in place. They owe him for it. So I think it's a really bad look for LSU, really bad look. I mean, Garrett talked about James Carville, the kind of the brash LSU alumni last week about all the problems, and the governor saying he's going to hire the next coach, and they fired a AD, and now they brought in the assistant AD. So LSU's kind of in shambles. I don't know who'd want to coach there.
Garrett, what do you got, buddy?
Well, they definitely bungled this firing, and there were some settlement negotiations, between Woodward, who was the athletic director, and Brian Kelly right after. I mean, they'd offered him $30 million, I think, to take that, and that there wouldn't be any offset, regarding finding another coaching job and stuff like that. That would have solved this, but that would have left $20+ million on the table. So he's going to court to make sure it gets clear on that he was not fired, but for cause.
Over to Major League Baseball, pretty wild story. Emmanuel Clase, Luis Ortiz, two pitchers from the Guardians indicted for pitch rigging. What do we have going on here?
Yeah, here we go again, right? And it really seems like all of these stories are a lot of them are involving these micro bets, right? Prop bets. So you can bet on one single pitch, right? Whether it's above or below a certain velocity, and whether it's going to be a ball or a strike. And so as this has just become commonplace, that's what's happened here with these two Guardians pitchers, and they're both facing indictments of wire fraud, bribery, money laundering, that sort of thing, and that they'd been throwing these particular pitches, right? And in that case, I can't remember which one, but I think it was Clase, Emmanuel Clase. He typically would throw a 99 mile an hour, whatever slider or something, and then he'd spike it into the dirt. And, some of the evidence on this is from the dugout. He's on his phone, which he's not supposed to be, calling his co-conspirator, probably to say, hey, the third pitch, I'm going to throw this. And they placed their bets on it. What's crazy to me, Spence, is that these guys who have these multi-million-dollar MLB contracts, apparently their co-conspirators made something to the tune of $450,000, and then these couple of Guardians pitchers, they would take some small percentage of that, which is a fraction of what they make as a major league pitcher, and potentially now that is down the drain their careers, and they're looking at potential prison time. They both pled not guilty, but I think there's a big issue here in sports surrounding these prop bets.
No doubt. We've seen it in the NBA, now over to Major League Baseball, and over to you, Preston. What do you got?
Yeah, I can't think of a thing in sports where an individual, a athlete, could control something as much as a pitch being thrown. I mean, you've got these two obscure pitchers that I've never even heard of, ostensibly in a obscure game. You got 165 games, 30 teams, in the dog days of summer, something happening, and they can totally control this. What happens? And if I were in their position, I'd bet on me throwing a ball, because that would be really easy for them to do, right?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, no, it is spot on. All right, our old buddy Troy Taylor, who was here as an OC for a minute. We have talked about his lawsuit with ESPN. What's the latest?
Yeah, Troy Taylor, former OC here at the U, moved on to Sacramento State, where he had a really good run and caught the attention of Stanford. Unfortunately, he was at Stanford, I don't even know if a full year, but some things came out that were reported by ESPN about bullying females, employees, belittling, hostile work environment. And according to these were reported, and pretty fiery stuff. And Troy Taylor was ultimately fired for cause. And his claim is, hey, because of your reporting, what he claims is inaccurate reporting, I was fired for cause. So what did he do? He filed a lawsuit against the reporter and ESPN for defamation. And we've talked about defamation before, and you've got requirements. The elements are there has to be a false statement, it's published or verbalized, and it causes damages. Well, the damages Troy Taylor's claiming is that he was fired and he lost probably a really good contract. The other issue in a defamation case is if you're a public figure, and, I guess he rides the line if he's a public figure. Not most people could tell you who Troy Taylor was, and it's a pretty ubiquitous name, but if you're a public figure, that you have to show actual malice. Well, what's happened is he's filed a lawsuit, and now ESPN has filed a motion to dismiss. And some of their claims are pretty interesting. It's kind of like, well, hey, maybe we didn't get all right. Maybe it wasn't 3 female employees, but maybe it was 1 or 2, or maybe it wasn't to this level, and and kind of like, but we got the gist. And they point to certain case law where a judge comes in and says, you don't have to justify the literal truth of every word, and that there can be minor accuracies. That's what they're relying on. And Troy Taylor's coming at it saying, no, wait a minute. You relied on this investigation, which I think he says wasn't complete at the time and was inaccurate, and that he can prove that, in fact, these statements are false. So he's fighting this motion to dismiss. If it gets dismissed, it's done, and maybe he can appeal. But my guess is the judge at this early stage, I don't remember how early it is, but, he'll claim there's some issues of facts that need to be resolved in discovery, and the case needs to move on. So we'll see what happens here.
What do you got, Garrett?
Yeah, this comes down to, like Preston said, I mean, this standard of what ESPN's going to argue is that their reporting was substantially true. Like Preston said, they more or less got the gist of it. And Troy Taylor's going to really try to split some hairs here and say, well, I didn't, you guys said I bullied and belittled these women. I didn't really do that. I might have not been very nice, but it wasn't really bullying. And so, but ESPN's going to say, hey, you're not challenging the substance of what we've reported, just with how we've phrased it. And that's not going to be enough to win on a defamation case. I
caught Garrett off guard with this story last week because it broke 5 minutes before he joined us. So now that it has been a week, we can discuss Antonio Brown, extradited from Dubai for criminal charges, including attempted murder for a situation that happened in Miami. What should we know?
Yeah, and just this morning, more news on him. He was released on $25,000 bail. He's got to wear an ankle monitor. And earlier in the week, he'd pled not guilty to second-degree attempted murder charge. And so this arises out of this boxing match in Miami. I think it was last May. And there was, a scuffle and there's video footage that, out there about it. And what you can see in the video is AB's got a gun and he's running after some guys after he's been in this scuffle and fires a couple of shots. It's not really clear to me. The one guy kind of claimed that he'd been grazed by the bullet on his neck or something. I'm not quite sure if anybody was actually hit. And so no charges right there immediately, but eventually a warrant was issued. And then AB's been out of the country. And as you mentioned last week, Spence, he's been posting all over social media and, it's no secret where he was. And so Miami, their detectives got in touch with U.S. Marshals and had him apprehended in Dubai. And there's friendly relations between the United States and United Arab Emirates. And so it made it, I think, pretty easy to have him extradited. They don't have an actual treaty between our countries, but there is a cooperation agreement for investigating and prosecuting crimes and that sort of thing. So he's back in the United States now. Like I said, he's out with an ankle monitor, and it's pretty clear from some statements we've heard that he is going to claim self-defense. So we'll see.
All right, Preston, over to you, buddy.
Yeah, I wondered where our guy AB was. But, the problem is he's not only facing the attempted murder charges, but now there may be, he was evading talking to the authorities. So a guy that was as good as anybody, great, potentially Hall of Fame career. Boy, he's really he's been in the news for all the wrong reasons for the last few years.
Yes, he has. All right, final one for today. An Australian basketball player will be able to play at Idaho State, despite our friends at the NCAA objecting to it. No surprise. What do we got? Yeah,
we got well-known forward Caleb Van de Grede. He's an Aussie. Same story. He's trying to get extra eligibility, filed a lawsuit claiming that it violates antitrust, anti-competition. And so his history is pretty interesting. He's from Australia. He played 2022 at the Power Minot State, a Division II school, then 23, 24, and 25 at University of North Dakota, a Division II school, and he was really good. Had some All-American honors. Well, he got the attention of the mighty Idaho State Bengals, and he wanted another year, and the NCAA said no. And where it gets complicated is he played in an Aussie league in between these years called NBL 1. And the NCAA's claim was that he delayed enrollment and that, he's barred from getting more eligibility. And we've seen these go both ways, but the federal district court in Idaho came back and said he filed a lawsuit. And essentially what they do is, starting with our guy Pavia, he set the table for all this. They filed a temporary restraining order saying that there would be irreparable harm if he was not allowed to play, and there'd be monetary damages. And those, in fact, are at play. And the judge agreed and said he granted the temporary restraining order, saying he would be foreclosed from joining his teammates and lose out on the attention and renown that comes with playing Division I basketball. So he has won his temporary restraining order. It's always interesting where this goes. He's going to play, right? And does the NCAA decide to battle this in 3-4 months down the road, try to win it, and he's played his last season? Probably not. We've heard the last of Caleb Van de Grede.
All right, Garrett, final word is yours.
I think there were just too many issues here for the judge not to grant a TRO. I mean, one of the other ones that delayed his entry and enrollment was he had refused to take the COVID vaccine on some religious exemption, and with Australian laws and everything during the pandemic wasn't allowed to leave the country, and so couldn't enroll. So I think there's, with the religious exemptions and all kinds of different things, just too many issues, and so we're seeing that TRO granted.
Okay, gentlemen, before I set you loose for today, for any of our listeners who have legal questions, how can they get a hold of you over at Handy and Handy?
Yeah, Spence, we love coming on here and talk about these legal issues in the world of sports. Handy and Handy. First, I'll say that Handy and Handy, both of us from time to time drive pickup trucks, and one of us hates parking a pickup truck. You'll get the joke there.
Well played.
Handy and Handy is a personal injury law firm. We help people that have been involved in all kinds of accidents, help them through the process, the legal process, the claims process, make sure they get taken care of and compensated. We'd love to hear from you. Call us at 801-264-6677 or visit our website at handylawutah.com.
Well played, gentlemen. I appreciate you listening. That means a lot. Have a great weekend, and as always, go Utes.
Yeah, go Utes.
Go Utes.
There we go. There we go. Our good friends over at Handy and Handy. We'll catch a break, 5 o'clock hour of the show, all college football. Some news broke today that Mark Harlan will serve on the College Football Playoff Selection Committee after Mack Rhoades decided to take a personal leave of absence. Either he decided to or was strongly encouraged to. That's the info we have now. So final hour of the show before we turn it over to Thursday Night Football comes your way next on ESPN 700. Glad we got through it. Shout out to all the Rod Stewart and Richard Marks fans out there. Today's show is dedicated to you. All right. Mark Harlan will serve on the College Football Playoff Committee. Some big news locally, unexpected, that came down today. We didn't do much on this, but the Major League Soccer Board of Governors has voted to align with the international soccer calendar by shifting the regular season to a summer to spring campaign beginning in 2027. What that means is you will be watching RSL soccer in frigid conditions. My guess is the Millers are going to have to look at something to change that logistical kind of approach of the stadium out there to make sure that folks aren't freezing. Watching a soccer game in January outside in Utah doesn't sound awesome. We will actually do a little RSL next week. A little birdie, cute little birdie, such a cute little birdie, tipped me off that there's a pretty exciting RSL announcement coming our way next week. But Jazz basketball tonight. We will catch a break and bring you Thursday Night Football between the Jets and, of course, the Patriots from Gillette in Foxborough. But, Porter, before we get out of here, what comes our way on a Friday weekend edition of the program?
A Friday edition of The Drive. We'll talk college football. We'll talk a little bit of NBA, go all over the map in that regard. Dave McMenamin for your NBA Daily Assist. Robert Rojo Johnson talking some Mutes. Paul Pugmire talking some golf for our PGA Tour leaderboard update. We'll catch up with our friend Max Brown and go from there.
All right, Good Friday show. Join us for that. We will say goodnight. And a special thank you to Bill Bush, Kyle Bonagura, Howard Beck, and Sam Bruckhouse. Of course, our good friends at handy if you miss any of the sound from the show. The website is ESPN700sports.com. Make sure to download our mobile app. You can take us on the go wherever you are at. You can listen to ESPN 700. And then for what we do in our space, 4 hours every afternoon, check out the podcast page. It is called The Drive with Spence Checketts. It's available wherever you get your shows. So subscribe, rate, review, say nice things in the comments. Give us all the stars. It helps out. If you have time, please do that for us. He's Porter. I'm Spence saying goodnight. Jets, Patriots, Thursday Night Football comes up after a quick break. So keep it right here on ESPN 700.